The fantail of the destroyer USS Holloway reeks of diesel fumes, vomit, and icy Atlantic salt. It's 0300 hours, November 14, 1943, deep within the Black Pit, the terrified nickname sailors have for the mid-ocean gap where Allied air cover cannot reach. Every man on board knows the German wolf packs are out there, sliding through the crushing darkness, waiting for a sound. But the 3,000 men in this convoy aren't being hunted by accident. They're being sold out. What the captain doesn't know, what nobody sleeping in the berthing compartments knows, is that the convoy's exact coordinates are being flashed to the enemy from inside the ship. The only witness to this treason isn't a hardened watch officer or a Marine guard. It's a terrified 15-year-old boy named Noah Kettering, clinging to the railing in an ill-fitting uniform. He forged his birth date to find a brotherhood, but tonight he has stumbled into a kill zone. And now the traitor has seen him. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. To understand why Noah Kettering's discovery was a death sentence, you have to understand the terrifying mechanics of the Battle of the Atlantic. By late 1943, the ocean war had turned into a high-stakes game of blind man's bluff. The German Kriegsmarine had perfected brutal tactic, wolfpack tactics. They didn't just patrol, they swarmed. A dozen U-boats would string themselves across the convoy lanes, submerged and silent, waiting for a single radio transmission or a careless light to give away the Allies' position. For 4 years, the Atlantic had been a graveyard. Merchant ships carrying aviation fuel and Sherman tanks to England were being incinerated at night, their crews left to freeze in oil-slicked water. The only thing keeping them alive was radio silence. Absolute electronic darkness. If a ship used its radio, German high-frequency direction finders, Huffduff, would triangulate the signal instantly. A single slip-up meant a torpedo in the hull. That is why the betrayal Noah witnessed was so devastatingly effective. The traitor wasn't using a radio. He was using a focused red lens signal lamp, a device designed to preserve night vision, visible only from a specific angle directly out to sea. It bypassed the ship's sensors entirely. While the sonar operators listened for propeller screws, the enemy was receiving Morse code flashes. Course 090. Speed 12. It was a method so bold and reckless that no manual covered it. It turned the USS Holloway from a protector into a homing beacon. The experts, the captain, the executive officer, the veterans of the North African landings, were looking at their radar screens, confident in their technology. They assumed the threat was outside the hull. They believed their encrypted radios were secure. But the breach wasn't technological, it was human. And while the officers debated strategy in the warmth of the bridge, the convoy was being steered into a massacre. Into this freezing, mechanical slaughter stumbled a kid from Ohio who wasn't supposed to be there, who had no business wearing that white Dixie cup hat, and whose very presence on the deck was a federal crime. Noah James Kettering was born in a dusting of snow in Cleveland, Ohio. He should have been in his sophomore year of high school, worrying about algebra and varsity tryouts. Instead, on October 2, 1943, he stood in front of a harried Navy recruiter with a baptismal record belonging to a deceased cousin and a lie practiced until it sounded like truth. He claimed he was 18. He was 15. He looked even younger. In the harsh light of the recruiting station, and now in the shadows of the Atlantic, he looked like a child playing dress-up. His jumper was pristine but hung loose on his frame. His hat sat slightly too low over eyes that were currently wide with terror. The recruiter had passed him not because he believed the lie, but because the Navy needed bodies. "You're a bit small, son," the doctor had muttered, stamping his papers. "Try not to get blown away by the wind." Noah hadn't joined for glory. He joined because he was an orphan who wanted a family, a brotherhood he'd seen in newsreels. But as he stood on the freezing fantail, wiping sick from his mouth, that dream shattered. He had the sharp eyes of a signalman, a talent for spotting patterns and reading light that the Navy had quickly exploited. And those eyes had just locked onto the face of Lieutenant Commander Vance, the ship's gunnery officer, holding a red flashlight. Noah wasn't a hero. He was a 110-pound boy trembling in the dark. But he was the only thing standing between a U-boat torpedo and 3,000 sleeping men. The lieutenant commander smiled, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. The ocean was loud, the wind was screaming, and nobody would hear the splash if a clumsy recruit fell overboard. The lie didn't start in the recruitment center. It didn't start with the stolen baptismal record tucked inside a sweaty sock, or the trembling hand signing a false name on a federal document. The lie started in the hollow ache of a stomach that hadn't seen a full meal since late 1941. It started in the freezing draft of a Cleveland boarding house where the only warmth came from the radiator pipes that rattled like dying men. Noah Kettering was 15 years old, but the world had aged him in ways that didn't show on his face. In the mirror he was still a child. His eyes were too wide, too wet, rimmed with long lashes that the girls at school used to envy and the boys used to mock. His jaw had the soft, undecided curve of adolescence, innocent of any razor. He was 5 feet 5 inches of gristle and bone, weighing in at 110 pounds if he wore his heavy boots and kept his pockets full of change. But inside, Noah felt ancient. He was an orphan of the Depression, a leftover piece of a family that had dissolved into the gray industrial smog of Ohio. His father had died on a factory floor. His mother had followed him quietly a year later, taken by pneumonia and heartbreak. Noah had been left with nothing but a rosary he didn't know how to use and a burning, desperate need to belong to something that wouldn't leave him. The United States Navy was calling. The posters were everywhere, pasted on brick walls, staring from storefront windows. Uncle Sam wants you. They promised adventure, they promised 3 square meals, but mostly they promised brotherhood. They promised a line of men who would stand beside you when the world caught fire. For a boy who woke up alone every morning, that promise was more intoxicating than whiskey. There was just one problem. The law said you had to be 18 to die for your country. The Selective Training and Service Act was rigid, a wall of bureaucracy built to keep children out of the slaughter. You needed a birth certificate. You needed proof that you were a man. Noah had neither. But he had a cousin named James. James Kettering had been born 3 years before Noah. He was a sturdy baby, the pride of the Kettering clan, destined for great things until a fever took him before his first birthday. He was buried in a small plot in the Holy Cross Cemetery, a memory fading into the grass. But paper had a longer memory, and paper could be borrowed. It had taken Noah 3 weeks to work up the courage to request the copy of the baptismal record from the parish clerk, claiming it was for a family genealogy project. When he finally held the document, he felt the heavy, terrifying weight of the fraud. It was a stamped seal of approval from God and the state. According to this piece of paper, Noah was James. According to this paper, he was 18 years old. The morning of October 2, 1943, was gray and biting. Noah stood in the line outside the recruitment office on Superior Avenue, shivering in a thin wool coat that smelled of mothballs. The line was long, men with calloused hands, boys with varsity letters on their jackets, fathers looking for a paycheck. Noah stood amongst them, trying to make himself take up more space, trying to project a heaviness he didn't possess. He practiced the date in his head, a mantra of survival. November 4th, 1925. November 4th, 1925. I am James Kettering. I am 18. When he finally reached the front of the desk, the recruiting sergeant didn't even look up. He was a thick-necked man with bags under his eyes, burying himself in paperwork to ignore the conveyor belt of humanity passing before him. Name? The sergeant grunted. James Kettering, sir, Noah said. He winced. His voice had cracked. A high, reedy sound that betrayed everything. The sergeant stopped writing. He looked up. His eyes traveled from the baptismal record on the desk to Noah's face. He took in the smooth cheeks, the nervous twitch of the eye, the neck that looked like it would snap in a stiff breeze. 18, huh? The sergeant said, his voice flat. Yes, sir. Just last month. Noah tried to deepen his voice, forcing it down into his chest, but it just sounded like a bad impression of a radio announcer. The sergeant leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He looked at the line behind Noah, dozens of men waiting. The war was hungry. The meat grinder in Europe and the Pacific didn't care about texture, only volume. Ships were being built faster than crews could be trained. The Navy didn't need Hercules, they needed pulse and obedience. You got ID? Just the record, sir. Lost the rest in a fire. It was the lie he had rehearsed 1,000 times in the cracked mirror of his room. The sergeant stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Noah felt sweat trickling down his spine despite the cold. He waited for the yell, for the finger pointing to the door, for the threat of police. Go home to your mother, kid. Instead, the sergeant sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He stamped the paper. Accepted. Don't make me regret this, kid, he muttered, sliding the papers toward the medical bay. Next. The physical exam was the true gauntlet. It was a humiliation designed to strip away dignity before the uniform was even issued. 100 men stripped naked, shuffling in a line through a cold, tiled room. Noah tried to hide amidst the bodies, but there was nowhere to hide. He was surrounded by men with hair on their chests, men with tattoos, men with scars. He looked like a plucked chicken in a room full of wolves. He wrapped his arms around himself, his ribs visible against his pale skin. He saw the other recruits glancing at him, snickering behind their hands. Look at the baby. Look at the runt. When he reached the doctor, an overworked lieutenant commander with a cigarette burning in an ashtray next to his stethoscope, Noah held his breath. He stepped onto the scale. 110 pounds. The minimum weight requirement was supposed to be strictly enforced. You couldn't haul ammunition crates or man a fire hose if you blew away in a gale. The doctor looked at the scale, then at Noah. He poked Noah in the chest with a cold finger. Take a deep breath, the doctor ordered. Noah inhaled, puffing his chest out as far as it would go. It wasn't much. The doctor checked his hearing, his vision, his teeth. He paused at the vision test. Eyes are good, he mumbled. 20/20ths. Better than most. We can use that. Then he looked at the chart again. He looked at the height, 5 feet 5 inches. He looked at the weight. He looked at the face that clearly belonged in a high school homeroom, not a destroyer's mess deck. You run away from home, son? The doctor asked quietly, his voice low enough that the line behind them couldn't hear. Noah froze. This was it. The game was up. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. No home to run from, sir. The truth hung in the air between them. The doctor's expression softened, just a fraction. He looked at the boy, really looked at him, and saw the hunger. Not just the physical hunger, but the desperate need for a place in the world. He knew what happened to boys like this on the streets of Cleveland during a war. They disappeared. At least in the Navy, they'd be fed before they were killed. The doctor picked up his pen. He scratched out 110 and wrote 116. He winked, a quick, conspiratorial twitch of the eyelid. Eat a steak when you get to mess, sailor, the doctor said, stamping the file. Passed. Move along. 6 weeks later, Noah James Kettering, now officially Signalman Striker James Kettering, stood on the iron deck of the USS Halloway and realized he had made a terrible mistake. The Halloway was a Fletcher-class destroyer, a narrow gray dagger designed for speed and violence. To the admirals in Washington, she was a triumph of naval engineering, packing 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes into a sleek hull. To the crew who lived inside her, she was the puking ghost, a tin can that didn't ride the waves so much as violently disagree with them. Destroyers didn't roll like ocean liners. They snapped. They shuddered. They pitched and yawed with a vicious, corkscrewing motion that confused the inner ear and turned the stomach inside out. In the North Atlantic, where the swells rose like gray mountains, the Halloway spent half her time underwater, green seas smashing over the bow and hammering against the bridge glass. Noah gripped the lifeline on the weather deck, the salt spray stinging his freshly shaved face. The sensation of the ship beneath him was terrifying, a constant, groaning vibration of engines fighting the sea. It felt alive and it felt hostile. But the ocean wasn't the cruelest part of his new life. It was the eyes. From the moment he had walked up the gangway in Norfolk, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he had felt the stare of the crew. A destroyer crew is a tribe, insular and hardened. They were men who had seen the U-boat attacks of '42, men who had watched tankers explode and burn. They had calluses on their hands and ice in their veins. And then there was Noah. He looked ridiculous in his uniform. The Dixie Cup hat, designed to be worn with a jaunty tilt, sat on his head like a mushroom cap, emphasizing the smallness of his skull. His jumper, though issued in his size, seemed to swallow him. The collar flapped around a neck that looked too fragile to hold up a helmet. Hey, nursery school. The voice came from a group of bosun's mates huddled near the aft torpedo mount, smoking cigarettes that glowed orange in the gray dusk. Noah tried to ignore them, keeping his eyes on the horizon, but his ears burned red. I didn't know we were taking passengers from the orphanage, another voice laughed. It was Miller, a second-class petty officer with a face like a clenched fist. Hey, babyface. Does your mama know you're out past bedtime? My name is Kettering, Noah said, his voice struggling to be heard over the wind. Kettering? Miller pushed off the railing and sauntered over. He towered over Noah, smelling of diesel and unwashed wool. You look like a stiff breeze would blow you overboard, Kettering. How old are you really? 12? 13? I'm 18, Noah lied, the words automatic now. Same as you were once. Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. When I was 18, I was working a coal mine in West Virginia. I looked like a man. You look like fresh meat. He leaned in close, his face inches from Noah's. You know what happens to fresh meat out here, babyface? The wolf packs smell it. They smell the milk on your breath. You're a liability. You freeze up when the shooting starts and men die. Real men die. Miller poked a hard finger into Noah's chest, right where the heart hammered against his ribs. Stay out of my way. And for Christ's sake, try to grow a whisker. You're depressing the morale. Noah watched them walk away, their laughter snatched by the wind. He felt a hot prickle of tears behind his eyes and hated himself for it. He bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood, forcing the weakness back down. He retreated to the signal bridge, his sanctuary. Here at least he had a purpose. The signal bridge was the highest open point on the ship, a platform exposed to the elements where the signalmen worked the lights and the flags. It was cold, brutally so, but it was removed from the claustrophobic bullying of the mess decks. He found solace in the machinery of his trade. The 12-inch signal searchlight was a beautiful piece of equipment, carbon arc, shutter operated. It was a voice in the silence. Noah ran his hand over the cold metal casing. He had learned the codes faster than anyone in his training class at Samson. Morse code wasn't just dots and dashes to him, it was a rhythm, a language of light that made sense when the rest of the world was chaotic noise. Da. V for victory. Dot. C for Charlie. He was good at this. He had to be. It was the only thing standing between him and the crushing reality that Miller was right. He was a child. He was afraid. Below him the ocean churned, black and bottomless. The sun was setting, bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. The convoy was forming up, 30 merchant ships, lumbering beasts laden with oil and steel, surrounded by their sheepdogs, the destroyers and corvettes. The Holloway took her position on the flank. The order came down from the bridge, darken ship. Every light was extinguished. No cigarettes on deck. No open hatches. The ship became a shadow, a hole in the night. This was the Black Pit. Here the air cover from Newfoundland couldn't reach them, and the planes from Iceland were too far away. For the next 3 days they were alone in the gap. Noah pulled his pea coat tighter around his throat. The wool scratched his neck, itchy and uncomfortable. His stomach roiled as the ship pitched violently into a trough, the bow slamming down with a shudder that vibrated through the steel plates of the deck and into the soles of his boots. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat. I am James Kettering, he thought, gripping the cold steel of the signal light. I am a sailor in the United States Navy. But as the darkness swallowed the ship, and the first icy spray of the night watch hit his face, Noah felt the lie crumbling. The ocean didn't care about his baptismal record. The ocean didn't care about his motivation. It was vast and cold and filled with monsters. And somewhere in the darkness below decks, amidst the labyrinth of steel corridors and piping, another monster was waiting. A human one. Noah checked his watch. 1900 hours. 8 hours until the midwatch. 8 hours until 0300. 8 hours until he would step out onto the fantail for a breath of air and see the red light that would end his childhood forever. He looked out at the convoy, the dark shapes of the merchant ships barely visible against the horizon. They looked like cattle waiting for the slaughter. He didn't know it yet, but the butcher was already sharpening his knife, and he was standing right there on the bridge of the Holloway, checking the coordinates, preparing to open the gate for the wolves. Fresh meat, Noah whispered to the wind. The wind didn't answer, just screamed. The map pinned to the bulkhead in the wardroom of the USS Holloway was covered in a sheet of acetate, marked with grease pencil lines that dictated the difference between life and death. To the west lay the coast of Newfoundland, a rugged embrace of safety where the Royal Canadian Air Force's VLR, very long-range, Liberator bombers patrolled the skies. To the east lay Northern Ireland and the agonizingly distant promise of the RAF Coastal Command. But in the middle, stretching for 300 miles of desolate, heaving ocean, was the Gap. The sailors didn't call it the Mid-Atlantic Gap, though that was the terminology used by the strategists in London and Washington. The men who lived in the freezing damp of the lower decks, who slept in canvas hammocks slung 3 high in compartments that smelled of unwashed bodies and diesel oil, called it the Black Pit. It was a void. It was the place where the air umbrella folded. Once the convoy crossed that invisible longitude, the drone of friendly aircraft engines faded away. The sky became empty, a vaulted ceiling of gray clouds that offered no protection. In the Black Pit the convoy was on its own. 30 fat, lumbering merchant ships, carrying the lifeblood of the Allied war effort, crawled at a miserable 9 knots, surrounded by a thin screen of destroyers that looked like terriers trying to protect a herd of elephants from a pack of wolves. And the wolves were there. Noah Kettering learned about the wolf packs not from briefings, but from the silence of the older men. He learned it from the way Chief Signalman Brody scanned the horizon. His eyes narrowed into slits, looking for the telltale feather of periscope spray or the glint of sun on wet steel. Brutal tactic. The Germans didn't hunt alone anymore. The days of the lone U-boat ace were gone. Now they hunted in packs. A dozen submarines would string themselves out in a patrol line perpendicular to the convoy's path, submerged and listening. They waited for the thrum of propellers. Once contact was made, they didn't attack immediately. They shadowed. They radioed their friends. They gathered in the darkness, converging like sharks drawn to blood in the water, waiting for nightfall to surface and strike from multiple directions at once. To Noah, standing his watch on the exposed wing of the signal bridge, the ocean felt less like water and more like a living, malevolent entity. The Atlantic in November was a brutal teacher. The waves were not just waves. They were moving mountains of slate-gray water, capped with freezing foam that whipped across the deck like buckshot. When the spray hit Noah's face, it didn't just wet him. It burned, the salt crystallizing instantly on his eyelashes, sealing his eyes shut if he didn't keep blinking. His world had shrunk to the signal bridge. It was a steel platform high above the main deck, exposed to the biting wind on three sides. This was the domain of the signalman, the eyes and voice of the ship when the radios went dead. And the radios had to be dead. Radio silence is God. Chief Brody had growled on Noah's first day, a cigar stump chewed to pulp in the corner of his mouth. You touch a transmitter key out here, you might as well fire a flare into the sky that says, "Here I am, come kill me." The crowds have huff-duff. High-frequency direction finding. You squeak on the radio and they triangulate you in seconds. A torpedo doesn't care if you were just sending a birthday greeting to your mother. That was the terrifying reality of the Black Pit. To speak was to die. The entire convoy, thousands of men and millions of tons of steel, moved in a ghostly, enforced silence. No radar pings if they could help it. No radio chatter. No trash thrown overboard that could leave a trail. This elevated Noah's role from a simple job to a sacred duty. In a world without radio, the signalmen were the only tether holding the convoy together. They communicated with light and cloth. They used the 12-inch signal searchlights, their shutters clacking out rapid-fire Morse code to other ships in the screen. They used semaphore flags, their arms whipping through the air to spell out messages letter by letter. They hoisted colored flags up the halyards to signal fleet maneuvers, turns, speed changes, submarine warnings. Noah loved the work. He clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man gripping a lifeline. It was the only time he didn't feel like a fraud. When he had the halyards in his hands, or when his fingers rested on the shutter lever of the signal lamp, the crushing anxiety of his age evaporated. The complex language of naval signaling made sense to him in a way people didn't. It was binary. It was precise. There was no nuance, no sarcasm, no bullying in Morse code. A dot was a dot. A dash was a dash. If you did it right, the message was received. If you did it wrong, chaos ensued. Noah was determined never to be wrong. Striker, wake up. The shout snapped Noah out of his trance. Chief Brody was standing by the flag bag, the canvas compartments where the multicolored flags were rolled and stored. "Commodore is signaling a course correction," Brody barked, pointing toward the lead destroyer, the USS Vanguard, plowing through the swell a mile ahead. "Read it." Noah squinted against the stinging wind. Through the gray mist, he saw the tiny rhythmic flashing of a light from the Vanguard's bridge. It was fast, too fast for an untrained eye. The shutter opened and closed in milliseconds, a strobe light of data fighting through the gloom. Noah's brain shifted gears. He didn't see flashes, he saw letters. See, you. Execute, Noah shouted over the roar of the wind, his voice thin but clear. Turn, 9-0. Read the rest. Brody yelled, testing him. The light flashed again. Speed 1-2, Noah called out. Immediate. Brody grunted, a sound that was the closest thing to praise Noah ever got. Hoist the acknowledgement. Baker flag. Get it up there, kid, before the old man on the bridge has an aneurysm. Noah moved. He didn't run. You didn't run on a destroyer deck pitching 30 degrees unless you wanted to break your neck, but he moved with a fluid, practiced urgency. His frozen fingers, red and raw despite his gloves, dug into the flag bag. He found the red Baker flag, a solid red square, and clipped it to the halyard. With a heave of his small shoulders, he ran the flag up the line. The wind caught it, snapping the fabric with a sound like a pistol shot, whipping it out stiff against the gray sky. Down the line of the convoy, other ships were doing the same. It was a silent ballet. 30 ships turning in unison, guided only by flickering lights and colored cloth. If one ship missed the signal, if one helmsman turned too late, they would collide. In the heavy seas, a collision was as deadly as a torpedo. Noah watched the Holloway's bow swing into the turn, the ship leaning hard as she bit into the swell. He felt a surge of pride, hot and sharp in his chest. I did that. He had read the code. He had relayed the order. He was part of the machine. For a moment, just a moment, he wasn't 15. He wasn't the orphan from Cleveland who stuffed newspaper in his shoes to make them fit. He was a United States Navy signalman. But the feeling was fragile. As soon as the maneuver was complete and the flags were hauled down, the cold crept back in. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. Not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. He was obsessed with perfection. He had to be. The other men, Miller, the bosun's mates, even the cook, they could afford to be sloppy. They were men. They had hair on their chests and deep voices and the natural arrogance of adulthood. They belonged here. If they made a mistake, it was just a mistake. If Noah made a mistake, it was proof. Proof that he was a child. Proof that the fresh meat didn't have the stamina. He felt the constant, burning gaze of the crew on his back. They were waiting for him to fail. They were waiting for the sea to break him. You're gripping that rail like it owes you money, Kettering, a voice said. Noah jumped, spinning around. It was Miller, leaning against the mesmerizing gray steel of the stack, a smirk plastered on his face. Miller seemed immune to the cold, wearing his coat unbuttoned at the top, exposing a thick wool sweater. Just keeping steady, Miller, Noah stammered, hating the way his voice hiked up an octave. You look like a scared cat in a thunderstorm, Miller laughed, spitting over the side. The wind caught the spittle and flung it back toward the hull. You know we're deep in it now, right? The pit. This is where they get you. Miller gestured to the empty ocean. You ever see a tanker get hit? It's not like the movies. It doesn't just go boom. The AV gas goes up and the water catches fire. The poor bastards jump in thinking the water will save them and they just boil. You can hear them screaming over the engines. Noah swallowed hard, his throat dry. I know. You don't know shit, Miller sneered, his eyes hard. You're a tourist. You think because you can flash a light you're a sailor? You're just a kid playing dress up with your dead cousin's papers. Noah froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale. He knows. Miller saw the reaction and laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. Oh, don't look so like you're gonna puke. I don't know nothing. I'm just guessing. But I got eyes. You ain't 18. You ain't even close. And when the torpedo hits, nobody's gonna ask for your ID. You're just gonna die wet and crying for your mommy like the rest of them. Miller pushed off the bulkhead and headed toward the hatch. Keep your eyes peeled, Stryker. Try not to wet your pants when the shooting starts. Noah stood alone on the wing, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Just guessing. Miller was guessing. But it was a dangerous guess. If the officers found out, if the captain knew, Noah would be off the ship at the next port. Or worse, the brig. He turned back to the ocean, gripping the signal light until his knuckles turned white. He had to be perfect. He had to be so good, so indispensable that his age didn't matter. He would read every signal faster than Brody. He would keep his uniform sharper, his boots blacker, his watch standing straighter. He began to clean the lens of the signal light, polishing the glass with a rag even though it was already spotless. He rubbed in circles over and over, trying to scrub away the fear. Silent running. The term usually applied to submarines, shutting down engines, whispering, drifting to avoid detection. But on the Holloway, the silence was psychological. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of waiting. The sun dipped below the horizon and the world turned to ink. The order for darkened ship came again. The heavy steel covers were clamped over the portholes. The red lights were switched on in the passageways to preserve night vision. The ship became a tomb floating in a void. Noah's shift wasn't over yet, but the work changed. Now there were no flags. Now there was only the infrared scope and the shielded lights. He stared into the darkness. The convoy was invisible now, just a sense of presence in the gloom. The only sound was the wind howling through the rigging and the relentless crash hiss of the bow cutting the water. He thought about this secret Miller had teased him with, the idea that he was an imposter. But Miller was wrong about the real secret. The real secret wasn't Noah's age. It wasn't the forged paper in his file. The real secret was that the Holloway wasn't safe. Noah felt it in his bones. It wasn't just the U-boats. There was something wrong with the rhythm of the ship. He had seen Lieutenant Commander Vance earlier that day, standing on the bridge wing, staring out at the ocean with a look that didn't match the anxiety of the other officers. Vance had looked calm, predatory. Noah shook his head. You're imagining things, he told himself. You're just a scared kid, like Miller said. But he couldn't shake the feeling. He checked the time. 1945 hours. He would be relieved soon. He could go down to the mess deck, try to force down some powdered eggs and stale bread, and then crawl into his hammock for a few hours of fitful sleep before the midwatch. The midwatch. 0000 to 0400. The graveyard shift. That was the watch where the demons came out. That was the watch where the eyes played tricks on you, where every whitecap looked like a periscope wake, where the exhaustion made you hallucinate. Noah finished polishing the lens. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass. A distorted, ghostly face stared back. A boy pretending to be a man. I am James Kettering, he whispered to the glass. I am a sailor. He didn't know that in less than 8 hours, the boy in the reflection would be gone. He didn't know that the silence of the black pit was about to be broken, not by an explosion but by a single treacherous beam of red light. He secured the canvas cover over the searchlight, his fingers numb and clumsy. The ship rolled heavily, groaning under the strain of the Atlantic. Down in the water, miles away but closing fast, the propellers of U-96 and her sisters were churning the black water, guided by a scent they hadn't picked up yet, but soon would. Noah stepped into the hatch, leaving the wind behind, and descended into the red-lit belly of the destroyer, walking unknowingly toward the moment that would define his life, or end it. The Atlantic Ocean in November does not sleep. It raves. At 0300 hours on the morning of November 14, 1943, the USS Halloway was no longer a ship navigating a sea. It was a steel capsule being digested by a beast. The storm that had been threatening the convoy since dusk had finally broken with catastrophic violence. The wind was a solid wall of noise, shrieking through the rigging at 50 knots, and the swells had grown into moving canyons of black water, 30 feet high and capped with foam that glowed faintly, ghostly white in the pitch darkness. Down in the aft berthing compartment, the world was a sensory nightmare. The air was thick enough to chew, a hot, humid soup of unwashed bodies, stale cigarette smoke, damp wool, and the pervasive oily stench of bunker fuel. But underneath it all was the sharp, acidic smell of vomit. Noah Kettering lay in his canvas hammock, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges. Every time the destroyer pitched, the bow smashing down into a trough, the stern heaving skyward, his stomach seemed to detach from his body and float up into his throat. Gravity was a suggestion, not a law. The ship would roll heavily to starboard, hanging there for an agonizing 3 seconds while mesh trays slid across the deck and loose gear clanged against the bulkheads, before snapping back to port with a violence that threatened to toss men out of their racks. Noah squeezed his eyes shut, trying to recite the alphabet backwards, trying to think of the cornfields in Ohio, trying to think of anything but the lurching, corkscrewing motion of the ship. It didn't work. Bile rose in his throat, hot and bitter. He swallowed it down, breathing shallowly through his nose. He had been on board for weeks, but the destroyer lean hadn't normalized for him yet. The old salts, men like Miller, could sleep through a typhoon, snoring rhythmically while the ship tried to tear itself apart. But Noah was 15. His inner ear was still screaming in protest. A fresh wave of nausea hit him, stronger than the last. The ship shuddered as a massive wave hammered the hull, the sound like a sledgehammer striking a tin drum. Noah swung his legs out of the hammock, his boots hitting the steel deck. He couldn't stay here. If he stayed here, he would be sick right on the deck plates, and the humiliation of cleaning it up under the glare of the bosun's mate was a fate worse than death. He grabbed his pea coat, jamming his arms into the sleeves, and shoved his Dixie cup hat onto his head. He needed air. Cold, brutal, biting air. It was a violation of protocol to be wandering the weather decks during a storm, especially during darkened ship, but the biological imperative to breathe fresh oxygen overrode his fear of the master-at-arms. He moved like a drunkard through the passageway, bracing himself against the bulkheads as the floor tilted crazy angles. The ship was bathed in the eerie, blood-colored glow of the red battle lights. They cast long, shifting shadows that danced on the rivets and pipes, turning the corridor into the throat of a monster. He climbed the ladder toward the aft hatch, the metal rungs slick with condensation. The noise of the ocean grew louder with every step, a dull roar that vibrated through the soles of his boots. When he cracked the hatch open, the wind tore it from his grip, slamming it against the stop with a clang that was instantly swallowed by the storm. Noah stepped out onto the fantail and the world disappeared. There was no sky. There was no horizon. There was only absolute, suffocating blackness. The heavy storm clouds had strangled the moon and the stars. The only way to tell where the ocean began and the sky ended was the freezing spray that lashed his face like a handful of gravel. He grabbed the lifeline, the steel cable biting into his gloves, and wrapped his arm around a stanchion. He gasped, sucking in great gulps of the freezing air. It tasted of salt and ozone. He leaned over the rail, retching dryly into the abyss, his small body shaking with the effort. Below him, the twin screws of the Holloway churned the water into a boiling white froth. The wake was a phosphorescent trail stretching back into the dark, a road map of turbulence. Noah wiped his mouth with his sleeve. The nausea began to recede, replaced by the numbing cold. He stood there for a moment, letting the wind scour him clean. He felt small, infinitesimally small. He was a speck of dust on a chip of steel in a universe of water. He was about to turn back, to retreat to the warmth and the smell of the berthing compartment, when he saw it. Movement. It wasn't a wave. It was a shadow darker than the night, detaching itself from the silhouette of the depth charge racks. Noah froze. His first thought was that it was a lookout. But the aft lookout station was higher up, near the secondary gun director. There was no reason for a man to be standing down here, right at the stern, amidst the ash cans, the 600-pound drums of TNT waiting in their roller racks to be dropped on submarines. The figure was standing dangerously close to the rail, swaying easily with the violent motion of the ship. They weren't holding on. They were balanced, wide-legged, riding the deck like a surfer. Noah shrank back into the shadow of a vent cowl. His heart, which had just slowed down, kicked into a frantic rhythm. Is it a man overboard? Is someone sick like me? He squinted, his eyes watering from the wind. The figure raised an arm. Click. A beam of light sliced through the darkness. It wasn't the blinding white brilliance of the 12-inch signal searchlight. It was a narrow, focused pencil of red light. Red light was used tactically. It didn't destroy night vision. It didn't travel far. On the bridge, they used red lenses to read charts. In the passageways, they used red bulbs to keep eyes adjusted for battle. But this light was pointed outboard, straight off the stern, straight into the wake. The figure's thumb moved on the switch. The light blinked. Short, long, short, short. Noah's breath hitched. He was a signalman striker. He didn't have to think about the letters. They wired themselves directly into his brain. He didn't see flashes. He heard the voice of the code. Short, short, long. Noah frowned. A call sign? The light paused, then started a new sequence. The rhythm was precise, practiced. This wasn't a nervous sailor playing with a flashlight. This was a transmission. Da-dee-da-dit. C, da-da-da. O, dee-dee-da. U, dee-da-dit. R, dee-dee-dit. Stit. Of course, the word hit Noah like a physical blow. The cold vanished. The nausea vanished. He was suddenly, terrifyingly awake. The figure paused again, the red beam cutting a sharp line through the mist. Then the numbers came. Da-da-da-da-da. 0, da-da-da-da-dit. 9, da-da-da-da-da. 0. Course 090. Noah's mind raced. Course 090. That was their heading. Due east. That was the Commodore's order from 4 hours ago. But why? Why signal it off the stern? Why send it backward into the empty ocean? Unless the ocean wasn't empty. The figure shifted its stance as the ship pitched violently, sliding one boot across the wet steel to maintain balance. The hand holding the device, a modified torch with a red filter taped over the lens, never wavered. Dee-dee-dit. Dee-da-da-dit. Beat-dit. It-dit. Eat-da-dee-dit. Beat. Speed. Dee-da-da-da-da. 1. Dee-dee-da-da-da. 2. Speed 12. Noah pressed himself harder against the cold steel of the vent cowl. His fingers clawed at the rivets. This wasn't a check. This wasn't a drill. You didn't signal speed and heading to the fish. You signaled it to something that needed to intercept you. He realized, with a dawning horror that froze his blood, that the light was directional. The red lens meant it couldn't be seen from the bridge wings of the Holloway, nor from the other destroyers flanking them. It was visible only within a narrow cone, directly behind the ship. Someone was watching. Someone was trailing in the wake, submerged or surfaced just enough to get an eye above the waves, watching for the red crumbs being dropped by the traitor. Wolfpack. The word whispered through Noah's mind. Miller's voice echoed in his memory. They smell the milk on your breath. But they weren't smelling milk. They were being fed coordinates. The figure clicked the light off. Darkness slammed back down, heavier than before. Noah stood paralyzed. He knew he should run. He should scramble up the ladder to the bridge, burst into the pilot house, and scream that there was a spy on the fantail. But his legs wouldn't move. He was 15 years old, and he was watching a man betray 3,000 souls. The enormity of the crime pinned him to the deck. Who is it? The figure turned. Noah stopped breathing. He tried to merge with the steel wall behind him, to become just another piece of the ship's anatomy. The man didn't walk away immediately. He stood by the depth charge rack, seemingly checking the securing chains of the massive explosives. He was calm. Terrifyingly calm. He lit a cigarette, a massive violation of darkened ship. The flare of the match was shielded by his cupped hands, illuminating his face for a fraction of a second. It was a face Noah knew. A face he respected. It was the face that had inspected his uniform 2 days ago. The face that sat at the right hand of the captain in the wardroom. The match died, leaving only the cherry-red glow of the cigarette tip. The figure took a drag, the ember brightening, illuminating the high collar of an officer's bridge coat and the glint of gold braid on the shoulder boards. Lieutenant Commander Vance. The gunnery officer. Noah's world tilted on its axis. Vance was a hero. He had a ribbon bar on his chest that told stories of the Pacific, of the Coral Sea. He was the man who shouted orders to the 5-inch gun crews. He was the man responsible for protecting the ship. And he was signaling the enemy. Vance flicked the cigarette overboard. The spark tumbled down into the boiling wake and vanished. Then he turned and began walking forward. Toward the hatch. Toward Noah. Noah's paralysis broke. Panic, sharp and electric, surged through his limbs. He looked left, then right. There was nowhere to go. If he ran for the hatch, he'd meet Vance in the middle of the open deck. If he stayed by the vent cowl, Vance would pass within 2 feet of him. The heavy steel door of the hatch was 20 feet away. Vance was moving with the confident stride of a man who owned the deck. Noah crouched low, curling into a ball behind the cowl, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to since Cleveland. Don't see me. Please don't see me. The heavy footsteps clanged on the deck plates. Clang, clang, clang. The ship rolled hard to port. Vance stumbled slightly, his boots skidding. He reached out to steady himself against the very vent cowl Noah was hiding behind. Noah saw the black leather glove grip the metal rim inches from his nose. He smelled the fresh tobacco smoke clinging to the wool of the officer's coat. He smelled the expensive aftershave that Vance wore, a scent that didn't belong in the diesel-soaked air of the black pit. Vance stood there for a moment, regaining his balance. He was so close Noah could hear his breathing, slow, steady, rhythmic. The breathing of a man with a slowing pulse. He doesn't know. He doesn't know I'm here. Vance pushed off the cowl and took a step toward the hatch. Noah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. A tiny, shivering whimper of relief escaped his lips. It was a sound no louder than a mouse scratching in a wall. But on the empty deck, in the lull between wind gusts, it was a siren. Vance stopped. He didn't spin around. He didn't jump. He simply ceased moving. The stillness was more terrifying than violence. Slowly, deliberately, the lieutenant commander turned his head. He didn't need the red flashlight this time. A bolt of lightning, jagged and brilliant, tore through the clouds miles away. It wasn't much, just a flashbulb pop of illumination that lasted for a heartbeat. But it was enough. The white light washed over the deck. It illuminated the depth charge racks. It illuminated the slick black steel. And it illuminated the pale, terrified face of a boy crouched in the shadows, his eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. Noah looked up. Vance looked down. The lightning faded, plunging them back into darkness, but the image was burned onto Noah's retinas. He had seen Vance's eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't fearful. They were dead. Flat, shark-like, and empty of anything resembling mercy. Rough seas tonight, Vance's voice came out of the dark. It was smooth, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather in a coffee shop, not standing over a grave in the Atlantic. Then came the sound of a snap, the retention strap of a leather holster being unfastened. Easy to slip, Vance whispered. The red light clicked on again. But this time it wasn't pointing at the ocean. It was pointing at Noah. The beam of the red flashlight didn't just illuminate Noah, it dissected him. In the screaming darkness of the Atlantic storm, that single crimson eye felt less like light and more like physical pressure. It bored into his retinas, washing out his peripheral vision until the entire universe consisted of nothing but the blood-colored glare and the man holding it. Noah couldn't breathe. The air in his lungs had turned to solid ice. He was crouched behind the vent cowl, his knees pressed against the freezing steel deck, his hands gripping the rivets so hard his fingernails threatened to snap. He was a rabbit caught in the high beams of a truck, paralyzed not by indecision, but by the biological certainty of predation. The man holding the light took a step forward. The ship pitched violently, the stern rising 20 feet into the air as a massive swell rolled underneath them. Gravity shifted. Noah felt himself sliding toward the scuppers, but the man didn't stumble. He moved with the fluid, gyroscopic balance of a career sailor, his boots finding traction on the slick steel where there should have been none. "Stand up," the voice said. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The voice cut through the 50-knot wind with the terrifying clarity of a command that expects no resistance. It was a voice Noah had heard giving firing orders during gunnery drills. It was a voice he had heard joking with the captain on the bridge wing. Noah's legs shook so badly he wasn't sure they would hold him, but the reflex of obedience, drilled into him at Sampson Naval Training Station, overrode his terror. When an officer speaks, you move. He grabbed the rim of the cowl and hauled himself upright. The wind caught his oversized pea coat, whipping it around his legs like a shroud. He stood there, shivering uncontrollably, shielding his eyes against the red glare. "Lower your hands, sailor," the voice ordered. Noah dropped his hand. The light hit him full in the face. He blinked, tears streaming from the cold and the brightness, trying to focus on the figure beyond the beam. The man lowered the light slightly, directing it at Noah's chest, illuminating the stencil on his pocket. "Kettering. Kettering," the man mused. The tone was almost affectionate, like a teacher recognizing a student. "The striker. The boy with the sharp eyes." The man stepped closer until he was within arm's reach. The smell of tobacco and expensive cologne washed over Noah, sickeningly sweet against the backdrop of salt spray and vomit. "Turn around, Kettering. Look at me." Noah didn't want to. He wanted to close his eyes and wake up in his hammock. He wanted to wake up in Cleveland. But he raised his head. The red light reflected off the polished gold buttons of the bridge coat. It caught the dull gleam of the lieutenant commander bars on the shoulder boards. And finally it illuminated the face. Lieutenant Commander Vance. Noah felt his stomach drop out of his body. Everyone on the Holloway knew Vance. He was the gunnery officer, the gun boss. He was a legend among the crew. They told stories about him in the mess hall, how he had directed the fire that sank a Japanese cruiser in the Coral Sea, how he had stood on the exposed deck of a destroyer during a kamikaze attack without flinching. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and eyes that were usually crinkled in a confident, knowing smile. He was smiling now. But in the red gloom of the fantail, the smile was wrong. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were dead things, flat and black, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. They were the eyes of a man looking at a problem that needed to be subtracted. "Sir," Noah whispered. The word came out as a squeak, lost to the wind. "Speak up, son," Vance said, leaning in. He clipped the red flashlight to his belt, leaving his hands free. The darkness rushed back in, but Noah could still see the silhouette of the officer looming over him. "What are you doing on the fantail at 0300? Don't you know we're a darkened ship?" I was sick, sir," Noah stammered. The lie tasted like ash. "The storm? I needed air." Vance nodded slowly as if considering the validity of the excuse. "Seasickness. A terrible affliction. It makes men careless. It makes them wander into places they don't belong." The ship rolled again, hard to starboard. The rail dipped dangerously close to the boiling black water. Vance shifted his weight, planting his feet wide. "You have good night vision, don't you, Kettering?" Vance asked softly. "Chief Brody says you can read a blinker light faster than anyone on the watch bill." Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a trap. If he admitted it, he admitted seeing the signal. If he denied it, he was lying to an officer. I try, sir." "And what did you see tonight, James?" Vance used his first name. It was a violation of protocol, an intimacy that felt like a knife point against the throat. Looking out into the dark. "What did you see?" Noah's mind raced. He signaled the heading. "Course 090. Speed 12. He told them where we are. "Nothing, sir," Noah lied. He forced his eyes to widen, to look pathetic and young. "Just the water." It's very dark, sir." Vance stared at him. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The wind howled around the depth charge racks, rattling the chains. "Nothing," Vance repeated. "That's good. Because if you saw something, Kettering, that would be unfortunate. The mind plays tricks in the black pit. It conjures phantoms. It makes you see patterns in the chaos." Vance took a step closer. He was so close now that his chest brushed against Noah's shoulder. He leaned down, his mouth inches from Noah's ear. "You know, accidents happen all the time on these tin cans," Vance whispered. His voice was silky, devoid of anger but heavy with implication. "Especially in weather like this. A man comes out for a smoke or a breath of air, The ship takes a bad roll, the lifeline gives way. Noah stopped breathing. He could feel the heat radiating from Vance's body. Whatever you think you saw, Vance continued, you didn't. Because if you did, it would mean you're a liability. And out here we don't carry liabilities. We dump them. Vance pulled back, looking down at Noah with that same empty, frozen smile. Do you understand me, sailor? Yes, sir, Noah gasped. I didn't see anything. I swear. Vance stared at him for another long moment. Then his right hand moved. It drifted down to his waist, to the leather holster of his service pistol. Every officer of the deck carried a sidearm, a Colt M1911.45 caliber automatic. It was standard issue for maintaining order and security. Noah watched the black leather glove brush the flap of the holster. He heard the distinct tactile creak of the leather as Vance's hand rested on the grip. Noah's muscles locked. This was it. He was going to die here. Vance was going to pull the gun or maybe just shove him over the side. No one would hear the scream. No one would find the body. He would just be another name on the casualty list, a boy who fell overboard in a storm. Non-combat casualty. Noah squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact of the cold water or the searing heat of a bullet. But the blow didn't come. Rough seas tonight, Kettering, Vance said, his voice returning to a normal conversational volume. He patted the holster, a rhythmic tap-tap that sounded like a gavel falling. Very easy to slip. Vance stepped back. He looked at the hatch leading back into the ship, then back at Noah. Get below, Vance ordered. Get back to your rack. And if I hear a whisper, a single whisper, about phantoms on the fantail, well, we'll have another talk. The dismissal was more terrifying than the threat. It meant Vance was confident. It meant he didn't fear Noah. Why kill a mouse when you can just trap it? He knew Noah was 15. He knew Noah was terrified. Who would believe a seasick, underage recruit over the hero of the Coral Sea? Aye, sir, Noah choked out. Go. Noah scrambled past him. He tried to walk to maintain some shred of dignity, but his legs betrayed him. He stumbled, his boots skidding on the wet deck, and nearly fell. He caught himself on the hatch wheel, wrenching it open with frantic desperation. He threw himself into the safety of the airlock, spinning the wheel shut behind him, sealing the storm, and the monster, outside. But as the heavy steel door clanged shut, Noah realized he hadn't escaped anything. He stood in the red-lit passageway, panting, his chest heaving. The silence of the ship's interior was deafening after the roar of the wind. He could hear the hum of the ventilation fans, the distant thrum of the engines, the creaking of the hull. He looked at his hands. They were shaking so violently he couldn't make a fist. Course 090. Speed 12. The numbers burned in his mind. Vance had sent them. The U-boats were out there, adjusting their intercept vectors right now. They were aligning their torpedo tubes. And Vance was still out there. Or worse, he was coming inside. Noah backed away from the hatch, his eyes darting down the corridor. Every shadow looked like a bridge coat. Every creak of metal sounded like a boot step. He was trapped. The ship was 376 feet long and 39 feet wide, a steel box floating in the middle of nowhere. There was no police station to run to. There was no parents' house. The authority on this ship was the captain, and the captain's right-hand man was the traitor. If Noah went to the bridge now, Vance would be there. Vance would deny it. Vance would say the kid was hallucinating, seasick, unfit for duty. And then, during the confusion of the inevitable attack, Noah would have an accident. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He let me go because he knows I can't do anything. Noah stumbled down the ladder to the mess deck, his mind fracturing. He needed to hide. But where? The berthing compartment was a trap. Vance knew where he slept. The signal bridge was Vance's territory during general quarters. He passed a group of sailors coming off watch. They were laughing, talking about a girl in Norfolk, complaining about the coffee. They looked at Noah as he rushed past, pale, sweating, eyes wide with terror. Jesus, look at the kid, one of them muttered. Looks like he saw a ghost. Probably just puked his guts out, another laughed. Noah wanted to grab them. He wanted to scream, he's selling us. Vance is selling us to the Germans. But the words died in his throat. They wouldn't believe him. He was the fresh meat. The pretender. The boy playing dress-up. He kept running. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away from the stern, away from the memory of that red light. He found himself near the forward ammo handling rooms. The air here was cooler, smelling of grease and cordite. He slumped against a bulkhead, sliding down until he hit the deck. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around himself, trying to stop the shaking. He touched his gun. Noah had grown up on the streets of Cleveland. He knew what a threat looked like. He knew the difference between a tough guy and a killer. Vance was a killer. The way he had stood on the pitching deck, completely unmoved by the storm, completely remorseless about the betrayal, that wasn't just treason. That was evil. And Noah was the only one who knew. He closed his eyes and the code flashed behind his eyelids again. Da-da-da-da-da. 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 090. The ship groaned, a long, mournful sound of steel under stress. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life. The static hiss echoed through the passageways, making Noah jump. He pressed himself into the corner, terrifyingly certain that the voice would be Vance's, calling him out, telling the crew to find the spy. But it wasn't Vance. It was the bosun's mate of the watch. Now hear this. Sweepers, man your brooms. Clean sweep down, fore and aft. It was a mundane, routine order. The Navy didn't stop for terror. The daily grind continued. Men were waking up, drinking coffee, sweeping the decks, completely unaware that their executioner was walking among them. Noah stood up. He wiped the tears from his face with a dirty sleeve. The terror was still there, a cold knot in his gut, but something else was forming around it. A hard, jagged edge of anger. Vance had called him a child. Vance had smiled at him like he was nothing. Rough seas tonight. Easy to slip. Vance thought Noah was helpless. He thought the boy would crawl back to his hammock and hide under the wool blanket until the torpedoes hit. Noah reached into his pocket and touched the rosary beads his mother had left him. They were smooth, worn down by worry. I am James Kettering, he thought fiercely. I am a sailor. He wasn't going back to his hammock. He couldn't go to the captain, not yet. He needed proof. Or he needed to survive long enough to find an opening. Vance had made a mistake. He had let the witness live. He had underestimated the survival instinct of a boy who had fought for every meal he'd ever eaten. Noah took a deep breath. The air in the passageway was stale, but it filled his lungs. He adjusted his jumper. He pulled his hat down tight. The game of cat and mouse had begun. But the cat didn't know that the mouse knew the layout of the maze. Noah stepped out of the shadows and began to move forward, toward the heart of the ship. The fresh meat was gone. In his place was something desperate, terrified, and dangerous. Above him on the weather deck the storm raged on. And somewhere in the black water, the wolf pack turned their rudders, setting a course for 090, guided by the red light of a hero. Noah Kettering sat on the edge of his rack in the aft crew berthing, staring at the steel toes of his boots. His hands were clamped between his knees to stop the shaking, but the tremors traveled up his arms and rattled his teeth. The compartment was a symphony of human exhaustion. 60 men were packed into a space the size of a school bus, stacked 3 high in canvas hammocks that swung in unison with the roll of the ship. The air was a stagnant, humid soup of carbon dioxide, unwashed wool, and the metallic tang of fierce sweat. Snores sawed through the darkness, punctuated by the occasional groan of a sailor trapped in a nightmare or the wet cough of a smoker's lung clearing itself. It should have been comforting. This was the brotherhood the recruitment posters had promised, the collective warmth of men united by a common purpose. But tonight, the crowded room felt like a prison cell. Every sleeping face looked like a potential witness who wouldn't speak up. Every shadow in the corner looked like Lieutenant Commander Vance waiting to finish what he started on the fantail. Noah squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image of the red flashlight cutting through the storm. Course 090. Speed 12. The numbers were burned into his brain like a brand. He knew what they meant. He knew the U-boats were out there, adjusting their hydrophones, plotting an intercept course. The Holloway was steaming directly into an ambush, led by the hand of its own gunnery officer. He lay back, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to his chin, trying to disappear. Just sleep, he told himself. Just close your eyes. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe the seasickness made you crazy. But he knew it wasn't madness. He could still smell the expensive cologne on Vance's coat. He could still hear the snap of the holster. Paranoia, cold and slithering, began to coil around his throat. He needed to tell someone. The urge was physical, a pressure building behind his ribs. He needed to find an adult, a real adult, and spill the secret. The question hit a wall immediately. Chief Brody? The chief signalman was a good man, gruff but fair. But Brody respected the chain of command like it was scripture. If Noah went to him with a story about the gun boss signaling the enemy, Brody would drag him straight to whom? To the executive officer? To the captain? Noah rolled over, facing the steel hull of the ship. The condensation on the metal was freezing against his nose. The captain's cabin was located near the bridge in officer's country. It was a sanctuary of polished brass and mahogany, a world away from the grime of the enlisted quarters. But the social geography of the ship was even more rigid than the steel bulkheads. The wardroom. That was where the officers ate. That was where they drank coffee and played cards and discussed the war. Noah had seen them once through an open hatch, a table set with white linen and silver. Vance ate there. Vance sat at the captain's right hand. They broke bread together. They shared the same burden of command. Vance was the hero of the Coral Sea, a man with ribbons on his chest and the respect of the entire fleet. And Noah? Noah was a 15-year-old runaway with a forged baptismal record and a uniform that didn't fit. He was the fresh meat, the seasick kid who puked on the deck. If he walked into the captain's quarters and accused Vance of treason, it wouldn't be an investigation. It would be a mutiny. Vance would smile that terrifying empty smile and say, "The boy is delirious, Captain. Shell shock. I found him hallucinating on the fantail earlier." And the captain would believe the man with the gold stripes. He had to. The alternative was too impossible to consider. Noah realized with a sinking horror that he was completely alone. The ship was a fortress, but the enemy held the keys to the keep. Crackus. The sound of the 1MC, the ship's main address system, opening a channel made Noah jump so hard his head hit the hammock above him. The sailor sleeping in it grunted and kicked out, muttering a curse. The static hung in the air for a second, a breathless pause that silenced the snores in the immediate vicinity. "Kettering," a voice said. It wasn't the bosun's mate of the watch. It wasn't the usual boredom of the quarterdeck. The voice was smooth, efficient, and horrifyingly familiar. It didn't sound like Vance, but it sounded like Vance's authority filtered through a subordinate. "Signalman Stryker Kettering. Report to Ammo Handling Room 2 for inventory. On the double." Click. The speaker went dead. Silence rushed back into the compartment, heavy and oppressive. "Jesus, kid," a voice whispered from the darkness. It was Miller in the rack across the aisle. "Inventory at 0330? Who did you piss off?" Noah lay frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Ammo Handling Room 2. Noah knew the ship. He had spent his first week memorizing every hatch and ladder, driven by the fear of getting lost during a fire. He visualized the blueprints in his mind. Handling Room 2 was deep. It was located 3 decks down below the waterline, directly under the aft 5-inch gun mount. It was an armored box designed to feed high-explosive shells to the guns above. It was soundproof. The steel walls were extra thick to prevent a magazine explosion from gutting the ship. It was isolated. During general quarters, it was manned by a crew of 6. But right now, at 0330 in the morning, while the ship was at Condition 3 wartime cruising, it would be empty. Just rows of cold steel shells and the hum of the ventilation. And there was no reason on Earth, for a signalman Stryker to be doing inventory in a gunnery compartment. Signalmen handled flags and lights. Gunners' mates handled ammo. The two rates didn't mix. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation to a funeral. "Hey, Stryker." Miller hissed again. "You deaf? Get moving. You don't keep the gun boss waiting." Noah sat up slowly. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him feeling lightheaded and ghostly. "He's waiting for me." Vance hadn't killed him on the fantail because it was too risky. The body might have washed up against the screws. Someone might have seen. But Handling Room 2? It was a steel coffin. An accident, there would be easy to stage. A 55-pound shell slipping from a hoist. A fall down a vertical ladder. A heavy watertight door swinging shut on a neck during a heavy roll. "Whatever you think you saw, you didn't," Vance had said. But Vance didn't trust him to keep quiet. The summons proved it. The lieutenant commander had gone back to the wardroom, thought about the loose end, and decided to snip it. Noah swung his legs out of the rack. He grabbed his pea coat. "Go get him, Tiger," Miller chuckled, rolling over. Noah stepped into the aisle. He put his boots on, lacing them with trembling fingers. He stood up, swaying as the ship lurched into a trough. He walked toward the hatch. But as he reached the passageway, he didn't turn aft toward the ladder that led down to the magazines. He stopped. If he went down that ladder, he would never come back up. Vance would be there, or one of his trusted men, a bosun finding himself suddenly tasked with a dark favor. But if he didn't go, he was disobeying a direct order. In the Navy, that was a crime. In wartime, on a ship in a combat zone, it was practically treason. He was trapped. Go to the slaughterhouse or become a criminal. Noah looked aft, down the long red-lit corridor that led to his death. Then he looked forward. Forward lay the bow. Forward lay the mess decks, the galley, and beyond that, the eyes of the ship. He made a choice. It wasn't a choice born of bravery. It was the frantic, clawing instinct of a cornered animal. He turned forward. He moved quickly, staying close to the bulkhead, his boots silent on the linoleum. He was AWOL now. Absent without leave. He was a fugitive on a 376-foot island. He dodged a damage control party inspecting a fire main, ducking into a head bathroom, until they passed. He could hear his own breathing, loud and ragged in the tiled space. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at himself in the mirror. The eyes that stared back were wild, the pupils dilated. "You're not a sailor anymore," the reflection whispered. "You're prey." He slipped back out, moving deeper into the bowels of the ship. He bypassed the mess deck where the cooks were already prepping for breakfast. The smell of baking bread and coffee wafted out, a scent of normalcy that made his stomach cramp with longing. He couldn't go there. He couldn't be seen. He kept going forward, past the chief petty officer's quarters, past the sick bay. The ship narrowed as he approached the bow. The ride became rougher here. The bow of a destroyer in a storm is a violent place. It rises 30 feet into the air and slams down with a force that shudders the fillings in your teeth. He reached the forward collision bulkhead. Beyond this lay the bosun's locker and the anchor windlass machinery room. And below that, the chain locker. It was the lowest, wettest, most miserable place on the ship. It was the dungeon where the massive anchor chains were stored. Nobody went there at sea. Nobody. It was a dark, rusted void that smelled of harbor mud and ancient grease. It was the only place Vance wouldn't think to look. Not immediately. An officer in pristine whites wouldn't descend into the muck unless he absolutely had to. Noah found the scuttle, a small round hatch set into the deck. It was heavy, dogged down tight. He looked over his shoulder. The corridor was empty. The red battle lights flickered as the ship slammed into a wave. He spun the wheel. It groaned, a protest of metal on metal. Noah froze, waiting for a shout, for a boot step. Nothing. He heaved the hatch open. A blast of dank, fetid air hit him in the face. It smelled of wet iron and the ocean floor. He slid through the hole, pulling the hatch closed above him. He spun the wheel from the inside, locking himself in. Darkness. Absolute, total darkness. Noah fumbled in his pocket for his Zippo lighter, a prize he'd won in a card game back at Samson. He flicked the wheel. The flame flared to life, casting a shaking yellow glow on the walls. He was in the windlass room. Huge gears and electric motors dominated the space, covered in grease. But this wasn't deep enough. He needed to go lower. He found the access crawl space to the locker itself. He squeezed through, his coat snagging on rusted bolts. He dropped down onto a pile of cold, wet steel. He was sitting on the anchor chain. The links were massive, each one the size of a man's torso, piled in a chaotic heap like the coils of a giant iron snake. The locker was narrow, the hull plates sweating moisture. The noise was deafening. Every time the Holloway pitched, the thousands of tons of chain shifted slightly, grinding against itself with a sound like tectonic plates colliding. The sea battered the hull from the outside, the waves sounding like sledgehammers against the thin steel. Boom, grind, boom, grind. It was a torture chamber of sound. But to Noah it was a sanctuary. He crawled into the corner, wedging himself into a gap between the chain pile and a structural rib of the hull. He was shivering violently now, the adrenaline fading into a cold, hard dread. He pulled his knees to his chest and extinguished the lighter to save fuel. The darkness rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. He was AWOL. He was hiding in a chain locker while his ship steamed toward a massacre. But as he sat there in the dark, listening to the ocean trying to crush the hull, Noah's mind began to clear. The panic of the berthing compartment receded, replaced by a grim, street rat clarity. Vance had made a move. He had tried to lure Noah into a trap. That meant Vance was worried. It meant the gun boss wasn't as invincible as he looked. Noah touched the rosary in his pocket again. He thinks I'm scared, Noah thought. And I am. But fear was fuel. He had learned that living on the streets, fear kept you awake. Fear kept you moving. He had the information. Course 090. Speed 12. And he knew where the U-boats were. Vance had signaled LU. Noah replayed the sequence in his head. Oh, wait. It wasn't just a call sign. In the signal training manuals there were grid references. The Atlantic was divided into squares for navigation. But the Germans used a different grid. Vance wasn't just a trader. He was coordinated. He knew the German codes. Noah realized with a jolt that he wasn't just hiding. He was the only intelligence asset the United States Navy had on this ship. The captain was blind. The XO was blind. The crew was sleeping. Only the 15-year-old runaway in the chain locker could see the board. "You can't stay here forever, James," he whispered to himself, using his alias as if it were a shield. "You have to move." But not yet. He had to wait. He had to wait for the attack. It was a terrible, ghoulish calculation. If he went to the bridge now, he died. But when the shooting started, when the chaos erupted, when the torpedoes hit, that was when the rules broke. That was when a signalman could scream at a captain and be heard. Noah settled deeper into the cold, wet chains. He would wait for the war to start. Above him, 3 decks up, Lieutenant Commander Vance was likely standing in ammo handling room 2, checking his watch, wondering where the boy was. Vance would be angry now. He would be hunting. But the Holloway was a big ship, and it had many dark corners. Noah closed his hand around a heavy iron link of the anchor chain. "Come and find me," he thought. "I'm not fresh meat anymore. I'm a bone in your throat." The ship plunged into another trough and the chain screamed. Noah didn't flinch. He just waited in the dark, listening for the explosion that he knew was coming. The war did not begin with a bang. It began with a ping. Deep in the rusted bowels of the chain locker, Noah Kettering was huddled in a fetal ball, shivering against the cold, wet iron of the anchor links. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating velvet hood pulled over his head. For what felt like hours, the only sound had been the terrifying groan of the hull plates under the assault of the ocean and the grinding gnash of the chains shifting with every pitch of the ship. Then it happened. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears so much as a vibration he felt in his teeth. It was a high-pitched metallic hammer blow that traveled through the water, through the quarter-inch steel skin of the Holloway, and into the marrow of his bones. Bing! Noah's eyes snapped open in the dark. He knew that sound. Every sailor knew that sound. It was the voice of the active sonar transducer, the fish, sending a pulse of sound energy into the black void. Bing! It was searching. It was hunting. Seconds later, a different sound answered. It wasn't the clean echo of a rock formation or a thermal layer. It was the distinct, rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of cavitation. Propellers. Fast-moving screws churning the water. Sonar had them. Noah uncurled his legs, his muscles stiff and screaming from the cold. He pressed his ear against the damp steel of the hull. The ocean outside was no longer empty. It was alive with the mechanical heartbeat of the enemy. Course 090. Speed 12. Vance's signal had worked. The wolf pack wasn't just shadowing them anymore. They were closing the net. Then the world exploded into noise. The general quarters alarm began to scream. It was a sound designed to bypass the conscious mind and hotwire the adrenal glands. A relentless, rhythmic bong-bong-bong-bong that echoed through every compartment of the ship. General quarters, general quarters. The voice on the 1MC was booming, distorted by urgency. All hands man your battle stations. Set material condition zebra. Up and forward on the starboard side, down and aft on the port side. The ship, which had been a sleeping beast moments before, woke up with a violent shudder. Noah scrambled toward the scuttle hatch. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for in the terrifying silence of the locker. The order and discipline of the Holloway were about to fracture into controlled chaos. In the madness of battle, a 15-year-old boy out of place was no longer a target. He was just another shadow in the smoke. He spun the wheel of the hatch, his fingers slipping on the cold steel. He shoved it open and dragged himself up into the windless room. The difference was immediate. The red battle lights were pulsing now. The deck was vibrating not just from the engines, but from the sudden surge of power as the engineers flanked the turbines. The Holloway was accelerating, digging her stern in, preparing to dance. Noah scrambled out of the collision bulkhead hatch and into the forward passageway. It was a stampede. Men were pouring out of the forward berthing compartments, half-dressed, pulling on life vests and helmets as they ran. They were a blur of motion, a river of blue dungarees and gray steel helmets flowing with terrified purpose. "Move it! Move it! Get to the mounts!" a petty officer screamed, shoving a young sailor toward a ladder. Noah pressed himself against the bulkhead, letting the stream of bodies rush past him. He needed to go up. He needed to get to the bridge. But the traffic was against him. The flow of men was heading down to the magazines or out to the gun mounts. He took a breath, pulled his Dixie cup, hat low over his eyes, and stepped into the current. "Make a hole," he shouted, pitching his voice as low as he could, mimicking the authority he'd heard from the older salts. Miraculously, nobody stopped him. Nobody looked at his face. In the red-lit corridor, eyes were wide with fear, focused only on the destination. Identity had dissolved. There were no names anymore, only functions. Loader. Talker. Gunner. Damage control. Noah fought his way toward the ladder well. He was jostled, slammed against the steel walls, stepped on. The smell of the ship had changed instantly, the stale odor of sleep replaced by the sharp electric scent of ozone and the copper tang of pure fear. He reached the ladder leading to the main deck level. He grabbed the rails and began to climb, hauling himself up hand over hand. Boom. The explosion didn't come from the Holloway. It came from the sea. It was a sound so loud it wasn't heard, it was felt. A massive concussion wave slammed into the side of the destroyer, rocking it violently to starboard. Noah lost his grip on the ladder rail. He smashed his chin against the steel rung, biting his tongue. The taste of blood filled his mouth. The lights flickered and died, plunging the ladder well into total darkness for a terrifying second before the emergency relays kicked in. Tanker! Someone screamed from the hatch above. They hit the tanker. Noah scrambled up the last few rungs and burst out onto the main deck passageway. The watertight door to the weather deck was open for a split second as a damage control team ran out, and through the aperture Noah saw hell. 300 yards off the port bow, the night had been turned into day. The merchant tanker SS Alatna, carrying 3 million gallons of high-octane aviation fuel, had taken a torpedo amidships. She hadn't just exploded, she had disintegrated. A pillar of fire rose 2,000 feet into the air, a boiling column of orange and black that seared the retina. The heat was intense enough to be felt across the water, a sudden, blistering wind that smelled of burning chemical death. The ocean around the tanker was on fire. The slick of spilled fuel had ignited, creating a floating lake of flame. In the center of the inferno, the twisted skeleton of the ship's bridge was melting, sliding into the abyss. Noah stared, paralyzed for a heartbeat. He saw tiny black specks falling from the burning superstructure into the fire below. Men. They were jumping into a burning sea. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. A sailor next to him whispered, making the sign of the cross. "Secure that hatch," a chief yelled, breaking the spell. "We're next if we don't get those fish." The heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off the vision of the apocalypse, but the image was seared into Noah's mind. Vance did that. The realization hit him harder than the concussion wave. That wasn't just war. That was murder. Vance had guided the wolf pack to that specific ship. He knew the cargo. He knew the position. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded Noah's chest, burning away the last of his hesitation. He wasn't just running for his life anymore. He was running to stop a monster. He pushed off the bulkhead and sprinted down the passageway toward the amidships ladder that led to the bridge. The ship lurched violently to port. The captain was zigzagging, throwing the destroyer into hard turns to spoil the aim of any U-boats targeting them. Noah was thrown against a fire station, bruising his shoulder, but he scrambled back up. "Coming through. Runner," he yelled. He dodged a team of men lugging a heavy portable pump. He ducked under a swinging hatch cover. He was moving up the superstructure now. Level 01. The noise of the battle was changing. It wasn't just the roar of the fire anymore. Now the Holloway was fighting back. Crack. The 5-inch guns opened fire. The sound was deafening, a physical slap to the ears even through the steel walls. The main battery directed by Vance. Noah froze for a second at the realization. Vance was up there. He was in the director tower, above the bridge, controlling the guns. Was he firing at the U-boats? Or was he firing at shadows? Was he missing on purpose? "Get out of the way, kid." A sailor carrying a crate of 20mm ammunition slammed into Noah, nearly knocking him down the ladder. "Sorry." Noah gasped, grabbing the railing. "Where's your helmet?" the sailor screamed at him, his eyes wild. "You want to get your head blown off? Get to your station." "Message for the bridge." Noah lied, pointing upward. "Urgent from the XO." The sailor didn't check. He just shoved past, lugging the heavy ammo toward the anti-aircraft tubs. Noah kept climbing. Level 02. The signal bridge level. This was dangerous ground. This was where Chief Brody would be. This was where the signalmen would be manning the lights and the flag bags. If they saw him, the striker who was supposed to be in handling room 2, questions would be asked. But he had no choice. The only way to the pilot house, the captain's domain, was through the signal bridge or up the internal ladder from the chart house. The internal ladder was likely guarded or clogged with officers. He chose the external route. He kicked open the weather door and stepped out onto the signal deck. The noise was absolute. The wind, the waves, the roaring inferno of the burning tanker, and now the Holloway's own weapons. Whoosh splash. The K-guns on the main deck below fired, launching depth charges in high arcs out over the water. They looked like garbage cans tumbling through the air. They splashed into the black water. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. Wow, wow, wow. The depth charges detonated. Giant geysers of white water shot into the sky. The shockwave hammered the hull of the destroyer like a giant fist. Noah was lifted off his feet and slammed back against the flag bag. The metal deck vibrated so hard it made his vision blur. He scrambled to his knees, looking around. The signal bridge was chaos. Chief Brody was screaming into a sound-powered telephone, his face illuminated by the flashes of the 5-inch guns. 2 other signalmen were hauling on halyards, trying to raise a maneuvering signal in the gale. They hadn't seen him. They were looking outward, searching the water for periscopes. Noah stayed low, crawling beneath the overhang of the wind deflector. He was a rat in the rafters moving through the storm. He could see the bridge wing just 10 feet away. The door to the pilot house was there. Inside that door was Commander Higgins, the captain. The man with the power to arrest Vance. The man with the power to save the convoy. But between Noah and that door was a stretch of open deck exposed to the wind and the eyes of the lookouts. He waited for the next 5-inch salvo. Flash boom. The gun fired. The muzzle flash blinded the lookouts for a split second. Noah lunged. He sprinted across the wet steel, his boots slipping. He grabbed the handle of the pilot house door. It was heavy, held shut by the pressure of the wind and the watertight dogs. He put both hands on the lever and heaved. It wouldn't budge. Come on, he gritted out, tears of frustration stinging his eyes. Come on. Below him, the ocean exploded again. Another ship had been hit. This time it was a freighter, the SS O'Leary. A torpedo struck her stern. The explosion was duller, deeper, breaking the keel. The ship seemed to stop dead in the water, her back broken, bowing instantly. The sight gave Noah a surge of hysterical strength. He threw his entire 110 pounds against the lever. It cracked open. Noah stumbled inside, falling onto the linoleum deck of the pilot house. The environment changed instantly. The roar of the wind was cut off, replaced by the tense, hushed urgency of command. The pilot house was dark, lit only by the red glow of the instrument panels and the binnacle. Right full rudder, a voice shouted. Right full rudder, aye, the helmsman echoed, spinning the great wooden wheel. The deck tilted sharply as the destroyer leaned into the turn. Noah slid across the floor, crashing into the base of the radar repeater. Who the hell is that? A sharp voice barked. Noah looked up. Standing over him, bathed in red light, was the executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Miller, no relation to the sailor. And behind him, sitting in the high captain's chair, staring out at the burning sea, was Commander Higgins. But before Noah could speak, before he could gasp out the words traitor or Vance, the door to the exposed bridge wing swung open again. A figure stepped in from the storm, wind whipping his coat, water dripping from the brim of his cap. It was Vance. He had come down from the gun director. Vance looked at the captain, then his eyes tracked down to the floor, to the boy huddled at the base of the radar screen. For a second, the mask slipped. Noah saw genuine surprise in Vance's eyes. He hadn't expected the mouse to make it out of the trap. He hadn't expected the kid to survive the climb. But the surprise vanished instantly, replaced by that same cold, predatory calculation. Well, Vance said, his voice cutting through the tension of the bridge. Look what the cat dragged in. I told you, Captain. The boy is shell-shocked. He's wandering the ship. Vance stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his holster. Get up, Kettering, Vance said softly. Let's get you to sick bay. Noah scrambled backward, his back hitting the binnacle. He looked at the captain, then at Vance. The bridge was small. It was crowded. But for Noah, it was the loneliest place in the world. No, Noah whispered. Then he found his voice. He found the anger that had been forged in the chain locker. He stood up. He was small. He was trembling. He was dripping wet and bleeding from his chin. But he stood up. I'm not sick, Noah said, his voice cracking but loud enough to turn heads. And I'm not leaving. The captain turned slowly in his chair. He looked at Vance, then he looked at the 15-year-old boy who had just invaded his bridge in the middle of a massacre. What, the captain asked quietly, is going on here? Outside, a depth charge detonated, shaking the world. Inside, the war had just shifted fronts. The confrontation on the bridge had dissolved not into justice, but into chaos. When the executive officer had barked at Noah, and Vance had stepped out of the storm with that lethal, calm calculation, Noah realized his mistake. He had brought an accusation to a knife fight, but he had brought no proof. He was a 15-year-old boy dripping wet, bleeding from the chin, screaming about treason while the Holloway was engaged in the fight of her life. The captain hadn't ordered Vance's arrest. He had looked confused. He had looked at his trusted gunnery officer, the man who drilled the crew, the man who ate at his table, and then at the hysterical, shivering child on his deck. And in that split second of hesitation, the war intervened. A near miss from a 500-pound bomb, or perhaps a torpedo detonating in the wake, slammed the destroyer with a concussive force that threw everyone to the deck. The lights in the pilot house died, replaced instantly by the dim, blood-red emergency bulbs. In that moment of darkness and confusion, Vance had lunged. Not to help, but to silence. Noah hadn't waited. The survival instinct that had kept him alive in the Cleveland winters kicked in. He didn't try to argue anymore. He rolled, scrambling on all fours between the legs of the helmsman, and bolted out the starboard door onto the open bridge wing. "Secure that sailor." Vance's voice had roared over the wind, stripping away the pretense of concern. "He's AWOL. Stop him." But Noah was already gone. He threw himself down the external ladder, sliding more than climbing, the steel tearing at his palms. He hit the O1 deck and kept running, ducking under the barrel of a 20mm Oerlikon gun that was hammering tracers into the night sky. Now he was deep inside the ship again, and he was running for his life. The Holloway was a screaming metal animal. The 5-inch guns were firing in rapid succession. Wham crack, shaking the hull plates with a violence that rattled Noah's teeth. He could hear the hoist handlers shouting, the clatter of shell casings hitting the deck, the hydraulic whine of the turrets training. But Noah wasn't part of the crew anymore. He was a fugitive. He scrambled down the ladder to the main deck passageway, his breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. He needed to get to the mess decks. He needed to get to the galley. There would be people there, cooks, stewards, damage control parties, witnesses. Vance couldn't kill him if there were eyes on them. He's coming. Noah didn't look back, but he could feel the pursuit. Vance wasn't at his station. The gun boss should have been in the Mk-37 director tower, coordinating the fire control radar. Instead, he had abandoned the war to hunt a single witness. The passageway was a strobe-lit nightmare. Sparks showered from a blown electrical box near the sick bay. Smoke, acrid and stinging, hung in the air near the ceiling. Noah turned the corner toward the galley, his boots skidding on the linoleum. The ship lurched heavily to port, throwing him against the bulkhead. He bounced off the steel and kept moving, his shoulder throbbing. The galley was just ahead. He could smell it, the incongruous scent of stale coffee and grease mixing with the cordite. It was the heart of the ship. But the corridor was empty. Where was the damage control party? Where were the runners? Then he remembered. Condition zebra. The ship was sealed tight. Everyone was locked into their battle stations. The damage control teams were forward, fighting the fires from the debris of the tanker. The cooks were manning the ammunition hoists. The passageway was a kill box. Noah slowed down, his eyes darting to the shadows. The red battle lights made everything look two-dimensional, flattening the depth, hiding movement. He reached the heavy watertight door of the galley. It was dogged down. Locked. "No," he whispered, clawing at the wheel. No. He spun the wheel, but it was jammed, or maybe dogged from the inside. He pounded on the steel. "Open up. Let me in." The only answer was the dull boom of a depth charge detonating somewhere deep in the ocean. Noah backed away. He was exposed. He turned to run back toward the forward berthing, hoping to lose himself in the labyrinth of the lower decks. He took 3 steps and stopped. At the far end of the passageway, 20 feet away, a hatch swung open. A figure stepped through. He didn't need to see the face to know who it was. The silhouette was unmistakable, the high collar of the bridge coat, the officer's cap pulled low, the broad shoulders that seemed to fill the narrow corridor. Lieutenant Commander Vance closed the hatch behind him. He did it slowly, deliberately, sealing them in. "You're fast, Kettering," Vance said. The voice wasn't shouting. It was pitched perfectly to carry under the roar of the engines. It was the voice of a man who had already won. "But there's nowhere to go. The ship is locked down." Noah backed up until his spine hit the dogged door of the galley. He looked at Vance's waist. "The holster. You going to shoot me?" Noah shouted, his voice shrill with terror. "Go ahead. The whole ship will hear it." Vance smiled. It was the same dead smile from the fantail, illuminated now by the flickering red bulb overhead. "Shoot you?" Vance unbuttoned his bridge coat. "Don't be stupid, James. A gunshot is messy. It requires paperwork. It requires explanations." Vance took off his gloves, tucking them neatly into his pocket. His hands were large, the knuckles scarred. They were the hands of a man who had worked his way up from the enlisted ranks before getting his commission. Besides, Vance said, taking a step forward, we're in a combat zone. The ship is taking evasive maneuvers. Men fall all the time. They slip on ladders. They get thrown against bulkheads. Their necks snap. He cracked his knuckles. It's just the fog of war. Noah looked around for a weapon. A fire extinguisher? A pry bar? There was nothing. The passageway had been stripped for battle. Vance lunged. For a big man, he moved with terrifying speed. He closed the 20 feet in a heartbeat. Noah tried to duck, to scramble under the officer's guard, but he was exhausted and terrified. Vance caught him. A hand the size of a catcher's mitt slammed into Noah's chest, pinning him against the steel door. The impact drove the air from Noah's lungs with a wheezing gasp. Noah flailed, his fists hammering uselessly against Vance's thick wool coat. It was like hitting a mattress. Vance didn't strike him. He grabbed him. He grabbed the front of Noah's jumper, twisting the heavy fabric into a knot under the boy's chin, lifting him onto his toes. You should have stayed in your rack, Vance whispered, his face inches from Noah's. I gave you a chance. I gave you an out. Noah gagged, clawing at Vance's wrist. You're traitor? I'm a realist, Vance hissed. Do you think this war is about waving flags? It's about arithmetic. And you, kid, you're a remainder. Vance slammed him against the door again, hard enough to make stars explode in Noah's vision. Then Vance shifted his grip. His other hand came up, not a fist, but an open palm, striking Noah across the face. It wasn't a punch. It was a stunning blow designed to disorient. Noah's head snapped back. He tasted blood. His legs went rubbery. Vance didn't let him fall. He grabbed Noah by the back of the neck, his fingers digging into the muscle like iron hooks. Let's go for a walk, Vance grunted. He began to drag Noah. Not toward the brig. Not toward the bridge. He dragged him toward the starboard side hatch. The hatch that led to the weather deck. No. Noah screamed, the word tearing at his throat. He planted his feet, his boots screeching on the linoleum. Vance didn't stop. He just walked, hauling Noah's 110 pounds as if he were dragging a sack of laundry. Noah kicked out, his boot connecting with Vance's shin. Vance barely flinched. He just tightened his grip on Noah's neck, squeezing a pressure point that sent a bolt of white-hot agony down Noah's spine. Noah's legs buckled. They reached the hatch. It was a heavy steel door with a single porthole, black with the night outside. Vance threw Noah against the bulkhead next to the hatch. He reached out and spun the wheel. Clang, clang, clang. The dogs retracted. The door swung open. The noise of the battle roared in. The wind, the freezing spray, the deafening crack of the 5-inch gun mount directly above them. The ocean was right there, a churning black abyss only a few feet below the deck edge. Get up, Vance ordered. Noah was huddled on the deck plates, clutching his bruised throat. He looked at the open rectangle of night. He knew what was waiting through that door. The water was freezing. If the impact didn't kill him, the hypothermia would stop his heart in minutes. And the Holloway wouldn't stop. She would steam on, leaving him to the sharks and the U-boats. Please, Noah sobbed. The dignity of the uniform was gone. He was just a terrified child begging the monster. Please, I won't tell. I swear. Vance looked down at him. For a second, just a second, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity. Annoyance. You've already told, Vance said. You told the captain. But he didn't listen. And now, he never will. Vance reached down and grabbed Noah by the waist of his trousers and the collar of his jumper. He lifted him off the deck. Noah screamed. He thrashed, kicking wild, desperate arcs. His fingers clawed at the air, finding purchase on the doorframe. Vance stepped out onto the weather deck, carrying Noah into the storm. The wind hit them like a physical blow. The ship pitched violently, the rail dipping toward the water. Vance walked to the lifeline. The railing was waist-high. A steel cable coated in grease. You slipped, kid, Vance shouted over the wind, leaning close to Noah's ear. Just another tragedy of war. A seasick boy who lost his footing. He hoisted Noah up. Noah's legs dangled over the black water. He could see the white foam of the bow wave rushing past. He could see the fire of the burning tanker reflected in the swells like open sores on the ocean's skin. No! Noah shrieked. He grabbed the lifeline with one hand, his fingers slipping on the grease. He grabbed Vance's coat with the other. Vance calmly peeled Noah's fingers off his coat. He was methodical. He broke Noah's grip finger by finger. Let go, Vance said. Noah swung out over the abyss, suspended only by Vance's grip on his jumper. Die quietly, James. Vance let go. Noah fell. But he didn't hit the water. As he fell, his right hand lashed out in a blind, desperate reflex. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was the lizard brain demanding survival. His fingers smashed against the steel rim of an open scuttle hatch, a small, round access port set into the deck directly below the lifeline. His hand closed over the metal combing. The jolt nearly tore his arm out of its socket. His body swung wildly, slamming into the side of the ship's hull. The cold steel scraped the skin off his cheek. He was dangling. His feet were kicking in empty air, 10 feet above the rushing black water. His entire weight was hanging by 4 fingers of his right hand, gripped onto the rusty lip of the scuttle. He looked up. Vance was standing at the railing, looking down. The red light from the passageway spilled out, illuminating Noah's face. This was the image that would haunt him forever. Noah's eyes were wide, bulging with a terror so pure it transcended fear. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His knuckles were white, the tendons in his small hand standing out like steel wires. He looked like a gargoyle of fear carved into the side of the ship. Vance stared down at him. He looked surprised. He hadn't expected the catch. The ship rolled. The ocean reached up, a freezing wave licking at Noah's boots. Vance sighed. He reached for his holster. This time he didn't care about the noise. He couldn't leave the boy hanging there. He drew the .45 caliber pistol. He racked the slide. Noah stared up at the gun barrel. It looked like a cannon. "You have 9 lives, kid," Vance shouted, aiming down at Noah's knuckles. "But you just used the last one." Noah squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't pull himself up. He couldn't drop. Hail Mary full of grace. Click. The hammer fell. But there was no boom. Vance frowned. He racked the slide again. A stovepipe jam. The casing hadn't ejected properly from a previous test, or the magazine spring was weak. In the second it took Vance to clear the jam, the Holloway took a hard rudder to starboard. The ship leaned. The list was extreme, 30-35 degrees. Vance lost his footing on the wet deck. He stumbled back, grabbing the lifeline to steady himself. And in that second of reprieve, Noah saw it. Below him, slightly aft, there was a protrusion. The waste chute. A metal tube extending from the garbage disposal room, used for dumping trash. It was 5 feet down and 3 feet to the left. If he dropped, he died. If he held on, Vance would fix the gun and shoot his fingers off. Noah looked at the chute. He didn't think. He swung his legs, building momentum. 1 swing. The ship groaned. 2 swings. Vance was raising the gun again. 3 swings. Goodbye. Vance shouted. Noah let go. He fell through the darkness, limbs flailing. Crash. He hit the metal chute. It knocked the wind out of him, bruising his ribs, but he scrambled, grabbing the rim of the chute opening. He didn't fall into the sea. He fell into the ship. He tumbled down the angled metal tube, sliding through slime and garbage, landing in a heap of coffee grounds and wet cardboard in the waste disposal room. He lay there in the dark, gasping, alive. Above him, on the weather deck, Lieutenant Commander Vance fired 3 shots into the water, cursing the darkness, assuming the boy had fallen into the wake. But Noah wasn't in the wake. He was in the garbage. And he was angry. The hunter thought the prey was dead. But the prey had just gone underground. Noah spat out a mouthful of coffee grounds. He touched the bruise on his neck. You missed, he thought. You missed. Now it was time to make him pay. The smell of the waste disposal room was a dense, suffocating paste of wet cardboard, rotting citrus, and the acidic tang of coffee grounds. Noah Kettering lay in the dark, his chest heaving, listening to the blood rushing in his ears like a trapped ocean. He was alive. The realization was slow to arrive, fighting through the layers of shock and physical agony. His right shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm where he had slammed into the chute. His cheek felt wet and raw where the steel combing had flayed the skin. But he was breathing. He rolled onto his side, coughing up slime. The room was pitch black, located deep in the bowels of the ship near the waterline. The only sound was the terrifying groan hiss of the hull plates flexing against the Atlantic pressure and the distant, muffled thud of the 5-inch guns firing 3 decks above. He thinks I'm dead. The thought was a lifeline. Vance had fired his pistol. He had heard the splash, or what he thought was a splash. He would assume the fresh meat was currently sinking into the wake, destined to freeze or drown. Noah pushed himself up. His boots slipped on the garbage slick deck. He needed to move. If Vance realized his mistake, if he checked the rail and saw the open chute, or if he simply decided to be thorough, he would come down here. And in this steel box there was no chute to fall into. There was only a dead end. Noah fumbled for the hatch wheel. His fingers were shaking so badly he could barely grip the cold metal. He spun it. The dogs retracted with a screech that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He pushed the door open and stumbled out into the passageway. The red battle lights were flickering here, power surging and dying with every salvo of the main battery. The corridor was empty, stretching out in a curve of pipes and cables. This was the damage control deck, a labyrinth of lockers and repair stations. Noah took a step and nearly collapsed. His right ankle screamed in protest. He limped forward, trailing a scent of garbage and fear. He had to get to the bridge. It was the only play left. He had to scream the truth until someone listened, or until Vance killed him in front of witnesses. He turned the corner near the machine shop, aiming for the amidships ladder well. And then he froze. At the far end of the corridor, 30 feet away, the watertight door swung open. Lieutenant Commander Vance stepped through. He wasn't running. He wasn't frantic. He walked with the terrifying, methodical pace of a man inspecting his property. He held his .45 caliber pistol in his right hand, the slide now fully forward, the jam cleared. Vance saw him. He didn't look surprised this time. He looked resigned. "You really are a cockroach, aren't you, Kettering?" Vance called out. His voice was calm, echoing strangely off the steel bulkheads. "I checked the rail, I see the chute. I think, no, he couldn't have. But here you are." Noah backed up, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. "Stay away from me." "There's nowhere to go, James," Vance said, raising the pistol. "We're below the waterline. No windows, no chutes. Just you, me, and the noise." Vance began to close the distance. He wasn't hurrying. He wanted this to be intimate. He wanted to watch the hope die before the boy did. Noah scrambled backward, his eyes darting frantically around the passageway. A fire hose? Useless against a gun. A wrench? Too far away. His back hit a canvas bag strapped to the bulkhead. Emergency ditching kit. Every passageway leading to the weather decks had one. A heavy canvas satchel filled with the bare essentials for survival if the ship went down. Shark repellent, dye markers, rations, and signaling gear. Noah's heart skipped a beat. Signaling gear. Vance was 20 feet away. "Kneel down," Vance ordered, leveling the gun at Noah's chest. "Make it easy on yourself." Noah reached behind his back, his fingers clawing at the canvas flap. The brass snaps were stiff with salt corrosion. "I said kneel." Vance barked, losing his patience. He took a long stride forward, closing the gap to 10 feet. Noah ripped the flap open. His hand plunged inside the bag. He felt the hard, cold metal of a flare pistol barrel. The Mark 8 Very pistol. A single-shot, break-action launcher. He grabbed it. It was heavy, far heavier than a toy. His fingers scrambled in the pouch, finding the thick cardboard cylinder of a flare cartridge. Vance saw the movement. "Don't be an idiot," he sneered, lowering the aim of his .45 slightly. "Put your hands where I can see them." Noah didn't kneel. He lunged. He threw himself forward, not away from the gun, but toward it. It was a move of pure desperation. He dropped low, sliding on the slick floor, and kicked out with his good leg. His boot connected with Vance's shin, hard. It wasn't a martial arts move. It was a dirty, street fight kick aimed at the bone. Vance grunted in pain, stumbling sideways, his pistol shot going wide. The bullet sparked against the deck plates, whining as it ricocheted down the hall. Noah scrambled up, putting space between them. He fumbled with the very pistol, his thumbs struggling to break the barrel open. Snap. The barrel dropped. He jammed the flare cartridge in. Click. He snapped the barrel shut. He pulled the hammer back. It was heavy, the spring stiff. He had to use both thumbs. Vance recovered. He spun around, his face twisted in a snarl of pure rage. The cool officer mask was gone. He raised the .45 again. "You little bastard." Vance roared. Noah raised the flare gun. It was a standoff. A .45 automatic against a single-shot signal pistol. Vance hesitated. He knew what a flare gun could do at this range. It wouldn't just kill, it would burn a hole through a man. But Noah looked at Vance, and then he looked at the gun in his own hand. He was a signalman. His job wasn't to destroy, it was to illuminate. And they were standing in a narrow steel tube bathed in dim red light. Noah didn't aim at Vance. He jerked the barrel to the right. He aimed at the white-painted bulkhead directly next to Vance's head. "Lights out," Noah whispered. He pulled the trigger. Thumpush. The recoil kicked hard against his bruised wrist. The flare didn't fly into the sky. It slammed into the steel wall 5 feet away. A magnesium flare burns at over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It is designed to be seen for 30 miles across a dark ocean. In the confined space of the passageway, it was a supernova. The world went white. It wasn't just bright, it was searing. The magnesium ignited with a ferocious hissing sound, instantly consuming the oxygen in the corridor. The light was absolute, a physical wall of brilliance that seared the retinas and turned the red battle lights into meaningless shadows. "Ayah!" Vance screamed. He dropped his gun, clapping his hands over his eyes. The flash blindness was instantaneous. The intense UV radiation assaulted his corneas, and the sheer lumens overloaded his optic nerves. Noah had squeezed his eyes shut the moment he pulled the trigger, turning his head away. Even through his eyelids, the flash was painful, a wash of red-hot static. He felt the heat wave wash over him, smelling the acrid smoke of burning chemical salts. He opened his eyes. He was seeing spots, purple and green splotches dancing in his vision, but he wasn't blind. Vance was stumbling in circles, clawing at his face, screaming curses. "I can't see. My eyes. I can't see." Noah didn't wait. He dropped the empty flare pistol. It clattered to the deck. He ran. He scrambled past the blinded officer, ducking low to avoid the swinging arms. Vance lashed out blindly, his fist grazing Noah's shoulder, but he missed the grab. Noah hit the ladder well and began to climb. He wasn't running on stamina anymore. He was running on pure adrenaline and the terror of what lay behind him. His ribs burned with every breath. His leg dragged. Blood from his cheek dripped onto his jumper, staining the white stripes dark. "Go up." He hauled himself up the vertical ladder to the main deck. The noise of the battle was deafening here. The 5-inch guns were in rapid fire, the ship shuddering violently. He hit the weather deck hatch. It was open, a damage control team spraying water on a smoldering debris pile near the torpedo tubes. They saw him, a wild-eyed, bloodied apparition bursting from the lower decks. "Get to a station, sailor," a chief yelled at him. Noah ignored him. He pushed past, slipping on the wet steel, grabbing the external ladder to the superstructure. He climbed past the 01 level, past the blast shield of the 20mm guns. He reached the signal bridge level. Chief Brody was there, shouting into his headset, looking out at the burning ocean. He saw Noah pull himself over the railing. "Kettering?" Brody's jaw dropped. "Where the hell have you been? You're bleeding." Noah didn't stop to explain. He stumbled across the signal deck, the wind whipping his torn clothes. "The captain?" Noah gasped, pointing at the pilot house door. "I need the captain. He's fighting the ship, kid. You can't go in there." Brody lunged to grab him. Noah dodged. He was smaller, faster, and driven by a desperation Brody couldn't comprehend. He threw himself at the heavy steel door of the pilot house. He slammed the handle down and fell inside. The bridge was a sanctuary of tension. The red lights were steady here. The silence was heavy, broken only by the terse commands of the captain and the quiet replies of the helmsman. Commander Higgins stood by the forward window, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He lowered them slowly as the door crashed open. Every head on the bridge turned. They saw a 15-year-old boy on his knees. His uniform was torn and covered in coffee grounds and slime. His face was a mask of blood and soot. He was panting, his chest heaving like a bellows. "Captain," Noah croaked. He tried to stand, but his legs finally gave out. He stayed on his knees, clutching the binnacle for support. The executive officer stepped forward, furious. "Master-at-arms, get this man off the bridge. I told Vance to secure him." "Vance is blind," Noah said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room like a knife. The captain turned fully around. "What did you say?" Noah looked up. His eyes were clear now. The terror was gone, burned away by the magnesium flare. All that was left was the truth. "Lieutenant Commander Vance is blind, sir," Noah said, his voice gaining strength. "I shot a flare in the damage control passageway. He was trying to kill me." "That is enough," the XO roared. "This is mutiny. You are relieving yourself of duty, sailor." He signaled them. Noah screamed, pushing himself up. He signaled the wolf pack. "Course 090, B12, from the fantail," with a red light. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Even the helmsman turned to look. "He signaled to," Noah continued, the words tumbling out. "The grid code. He's one of them, Captain. He's steering us into the kill box." The captain stared at the boy. He looked at the blood. He looked at the sheer, unhinged conviction in the kid's eyes. "Captain," the XO said nervously. "The boy is clearly snapping. The stress." "Check the signal log," Noah pleaded. Check the hydrophones. Why did the U-boats turn? How did they know where the Alatna was? The captain looked out the window at the burning tanker. He looked at the formation of his convoy. Then the door to the bridge wing opened. Chief Brody stepped in. He looked shaken. "Captain," Brody said, his voice trembling. I just checked the aft lookout station. They reported a white flash in the lower passageway. And, sir." "Spit it out, Chief," the captain snapped. "The aft lookout says they saw a red light on the fantail at 0300. They thought it was a reflection. But, the striker here." Brody pointed at Noah. "He's the best reader I've got. If he says he saw code, he saw code." The captain looked back at Noah. The doubt in his eyes was fracturing. "Where is Vance?" the captain asked. "Down below," Noah whispered. Screaming. Suddenly, the talker on the sound-powered phone, the sailor connected to the Combat Information Center, spoke up. His face was pale. "Captain, CIC reports a contact. High-speed screws. Bearing 090. The exact bearing Noah had recited. "Range?" the captain barked. "Close, sir. Very close. Torpedoes in the water." The reality hit the bridge like a physical wave. The boy wasn't crazy. The boy was the only one who had read the script. "Hard starboard," the captain roared, abandoning all protocol. "All engines ahead, flank. Emergency turn." The helmsman spun the wheel. The ship leaned violently, groaning under the strain. "Signal the convoy," the captain shouted at Brody. "Scatter plan. Emergency turn to starboard." Aye, sir." Brody scrambled back out to the signal deck. Noah stood holding the binnacle as the deck tilted 30 degrees. He watched the white wake of a torpedo streak past the bow, missing them by less than 20 yards. If they hadn't turned, if the captain had hesitated for 10 more seconds, that torpedo would have gutted the forward magazine. The captain looked at the torpedo wake, then back at Noah. His face was gray. He realized how close he had come to losing his ship. He realized the monster had been standing right next to him all along. "XO," the captain said, his voice cold as the Atlantic wind. "Take a detail of Marines. Go to the damage control passageway." He paused, looking at Noah with a new, terrifying respect. "Find Lieutenant Commander Vance. If he resists, shoot him." Noah let go of the binnacle and slid down to the deck, sitting with his back against the compass stand. He closed his eyes. He had blinded the wolf, but the pack was still out there. And the night wasn't over yet. The bridge of a destroyer during combat is a cathedral of controlled chaos. It is a space defined by brevity, by precise orders, and by the sacred hierarchy of command. When Noah Kettering crashed through that hierarchy, collapsing onto the linoleum deck in a heap of blood, soot, and coffee grounds, the effect was more shocking than the torpedoes exploding in the water. He lay panting against the base of the binnacle, his chest heaving like a bellows. The red battle lights bathed him in a crimson wash that made the blood smearing his cheek look black. He looked small. In the company of the towering executive officer and the hardened lookouts, Noah looked like a broken toy dropped in a factory. "Vance?" Noah screamed, the name tearing out of his throat raw and ragged. "He's signaling them. He's signaling the pack." The executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Miller, stepped forward, his face twisted in a snarl of outrage. "Master-at-arms, get this man off the bridge. He's lost his mind." He sent the coordinates. Noah clawed at the binnacle stand, pulling himself up to his knees. He pointed a trembling finger at the darkness beyond the blast windows. "Course 090, B12. He used a red light on the fantail." Commander Higgins, the captain, stood by the forward windows. He was a statue of a man, carved from New England granite and worn smooth by 20 years of salt. He turned slowly, lowering his binoculars. His eyes were cold, hard, and utterly unreadable. "Stand down, sailor," Higgins said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the 5-inch guns firing overhead. "You are relieved of duty. You are to report to sick bay immediately." "I'm not sick." Noah wept, the frustration burning hotter than his injuries. "I'm telling you, he's a traitor. He signaled the grid code, LU. That's the German grid. He's steering us into a kill box." The bridge crew froze. The helmsman's hands tightened on the wheel. The talker on the sound-powered phone stopped relaying messages. The specificity of the accusation, the grid code, hung in the air like toxic smoke. "Captain," the XO hissed, grabbing Noah by the collar of his torn jumper. "He's delirious. Look at him. He's a child. He snapped under the pressure. I'll drag him to the brig myself." "Let him go," the captain said quietly. Sir? I said let him go. Higgins looked at Noah. He looked at the terror in the boy's eyes. It wasn't the vacant stare of shell shock. It was the frantic, burning focus of a witness who knows he is running out of time. Before Noah could speak again, the heavy steel door to the port bridge wing crashed open. Lieutenant Commander Vance stumbled in. He was a ruin of the man who had commanded the deck hours earlier. His hands were pressed over his eyes, tears streaming down his face from the chemical burn of the magnesium flare. His bridge coat was scorched. He moved with the erratic, stumbling gait of the blind, his hands groping for the bulkhead. Captain? Vance roared, his voice thick with pain and rage. Where is he? Where is the little bastard? I'm here, Higgins said, his hand resting on the chart table. What happened to you, Vance? Vance oriented himself toward the captain's voice. He lowered his hands, revealing eyes that were swollen, red, and weeping uncontrollably. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the flash blindness. The boy, Vance choked out, pointing a shaking hand into the room. Kettering. He went mad, sir. I found him wandering the lower decks, mumbling about spies. When I tried to help him, when I tried to get him to sick bay, he attacked me. He shot a flare gun in my face. Vance turned his head, sweeping the room blindly. He's dangerous, Captain. He's a saboteur. He's working for them. Why else would he blind the gunnery officer in the middle of a battle? It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Even blind, even in pain, Vance knew exactly which lever to pull. He turned the accusation around. The boy is the spy. The boy is the danger. The XO looked at Noah with renewed hatred. I knew it, he muttered. The forged papers. The lying. He's a plant. Noah felt the deck tilting beneath him, not from the waves but from the weight of the lie. It was the word of a 15-year-old imposter against the hero of the Coral Sea. It was the word of a fresh meat runaway against a man who wore the Navy Cross. Noah looked at the captain. Higgins was watching Vance. The captain's face was a mask of conflict. He wanted to believe his friend. He wanted to believe that the world made sense, that officers were honorable and recruits were unreliable. Captain, Noah whispered. Ask him what he was doing on the fantail at 0300. I was inspecting the depth charges. Vance snapped too quickly. Checking the readiness. With a red light? Noah asked. With a directional signal lamp pointing into the wake? You're lying. Vance screamed, taking a step toward Noah's voice. I'll kill you, you little traitor. Oh. Enough. Higgins slammed his hand onto the chart table. The sound cracked like a pistol shot. The bridge fell silent. Higgins walked into the center of the pilot house. He stood between the weeping officer and the bleeding boy. This is not a court of law, Higgins said, his voice deadly calm. This is a warship. And right now, I don't care about justice. I care about survival. He looked at Noah. You say you read a signal. Yes, sir, Noah said, his voice trembling. Recite it, Higgins ordered. Exact sequence. Don't think. Just recite. Noah closed his eyes. He went back to the fantail. He felt the cold wind. He saw the red flash. Lima, Noah said. Uniform. Break. Da-dee-da-dit. Da-da-da. Dee-dee-da. Dee-da-dit. Dee-dee-dit. Dit. C-O-U-E. Break. 0. 9. 0. Break. Speed. 1. 2. He opened his eyes. Course 090. Speed 12. That was our maneuvering order, sir. He sent it 10 minutes after the Commodore signaled the turn. The captain looked at the chart table. He looked at the grease pencil line marking their current vector. 090. Anyone could guess the heading, Captain? Vance shouted, wiping his streaming eyes. He heard the order on the bridge. He's making it up. Sonar. Higgins barked into the intercom, ignoring Vance. Bridge. Report contacts. The speaker crackled. The voice of the sonar man was tense, strained. Bridge sonar. We have multiple contacts. It's a mess down here, Captain. The thermal layers are jumping. Give me a specific bearing, Higgins ordered. Check bearing 090. Relative to the stern. There was a pause. A long, agonizing pause filled with the static of the radio and the thrum of the screws. Vance stood frozen. His hand drifted toward his pocket, the pocket where he kept his gloves. And his flashlight. Sonar report. Higgins yelled. Contact. The sonarman's voice screamed over the speaker. High-speed screws. Positive identification. Bearing 090. Range. Jesus, Captain, range is 2,000 yards and closing. It's a sub, sir. He's been in the baffles. The color drained from the XO's face. Bearing 090. Exactly where Noah said the signal had pointed. Vance lunged. He didn't lunge for Noah. He lunged for the door. He was blind, but he knew the layout of the bridge by heart. He needed to get out. He needed to get to the rail. Marines? Higgins roared. But the captain was closer. Higgins, a man of 50, moved with the sudden violence of a linebacker. He tackled Vance, slamming the gunnery officer against the bulkhead. They grappled. Vance was younger and stronger, desperate with the energy of a trapped animal. He threw an elbow into Higgins's face, shattering the captain's nose. "Get off me!" Vance screamed. "Search him!" Noah yelled, scrambling across the deck on his hands and knees. "Check his pocket. The bridge coat. Right side." The XO and the quartermaster piled on. It was a brawl in the holy sanctuary of the bridge. Fists flew, boots scrambled for purchase. Vance was kicking, biting, fighting like a demon. The XO managed to pin Vance's arm. He reached into the deep pocket of the scorched wool coat. He pulled out a heavy brass flashlight. It wasn't a standard Navy-issue torch. It was modified. The lens housing was taped over with black electrical tape, leaving only a narrow slit. And over the glass was a filter. A dark, blood-red disc of glass. The XO held it up. The red emergency light of the bridge caught the lens, making it glow like a demon's eye. "It's true," the XO whispered, horror dawning on his face. "My God, it's true." Vance stopped fighting. He went limp against the bulkhead, held up only by the Marines who had just burst through the door. He turned his face toward Noah. He couldn't see him, but he knew exactly where the boy was. "You should have died in the water, James," Vance hissed, blood bubbling on his lips. "You should have died." Torpedo. The lookout on the starboard wing screamed the word that every sailor fears more than death itself. Torpedo in the water. Starboard beam. Range 500 yards. The drama of the traitor vanished instantly, replaced by the physics of survival. Higgins shoved himself away from Vance, blood pouring from his broken nose. He looked out the window. He saw the white wake, a streak of phosphorescence cutting through the black ocean like a scar. It was aiming straight for the amidships engine room. Hard right rudder. Higgins screamed, his voice breaking. "Emergency flank. All engines ahead full." "Rudder is right full," the helmsman shouted, spinning the wheel so fast the spokes blurred. "Brace for impact." Noah grabbed the base of the binnacle. He wrapped his arms around the brass stand and buried his face in his shoulder. The Halloway was a thoroughbred racehorse, but she was made of steel. She couldn't turn on a dime. The engines screamed as the engineers opened the throttles wide. The propellers bit into the water, churning a massive vortex. The ship leaned. She didn't just list, she rolled. She rolled until the deck angle was 45 degrees. Books slid off the chart table. Coffee cups shattered against the bulkheads. Men were thrown across the room. Noah hung on, his feet dangling in the air as the floor became a wall. The torpedo was coming. He could hear it now, a high-pitched mechanical whine distinct from the ship's engines. It was the sound of the acoustic seeker hunting for the screw noise. "Please," Noah prayed. "Please." The bow swung past the track of the torpedo. Then the bridge. The torpedo passed under the stern. It missed the rudder by less than 10 feet. The magnetic pistol in the torpedo warhead failed to trigger. It streaked past the ship and continued into the darkness, eventually detonating harmlessly in the wake of a freighter a mile away. The explosion rocked the Halloway, but she was whole. Rudder amidships. Higgins gasped, wiping blood from his face. Slow to 1/3. The ship slowly, agonizingly righted herself. The deck leveled out. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the panting of terrified men. Higgins turned to the Marines holding Vance. "Get him off my bridge," Higgins said softly. "Take him to the brig. Double guard. If he tries to speak, gag him. If he tries to move, break his legs." Aye, sir." The Marines dragged Vance out. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't struggle. He just let his head hang, his blind eyes staring at nothing. As he passed Noah, Vance didn't speak. But the look on his face wasn't defeat. It was the hollow, empty look of a man who knows the game is over. The door closed. Higgins stood in the center of the bridge. He looked at the XO, who was holding the red flashlight as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at the sonar man. Then he looked at Noah. Noah was still sitting at the base of the binnacle. He was shivering violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical illness. His cheek was open to the bone. His shoulder was surely dislocated. He looked like a child who had been beaten by the world. Higgins walked over. The captain of the Holloway, a man who commanded 300 souls, knelt down on the wet linoleum. He reached out and gently touched Noah's shoulder. "What is your name, son?" Higgins asked. Noah looked up. He swallowed the bile in his throat. He thought about the baptismal record in his locker. He thought about the lie he had lived for 2 months. "James?" Noah whispered. "Signalman Striker James Kettering, sir." Higgins looked at him. He looked at the smooth face, the eyes that were too old for the body. He knew. He had to know. No 18-year-old looked like this. But the captain didn't call him a liar. He didn't ask for his birth certificate. "Well, James," Higgins said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have the eyes of a hawk, and it seems you have the heart of a lion." Higgins stood up and offered his hand. "Help him up, XO," Higgins ordered. "Get him to sick bay. Get him the best bunk. Get him a steak if we have one." "Aye, Captain." The XO stepped forward, his hostility gone, replaced by a stunned, shameful respect. He helped Noah to his feet. Noah stood swaying. His legs felt like water. "Sir," Noah said. "The signals, the grid." "We have it," Higgins said. "We'll relay it to the Commodore. We'll change the cipher. You stopped them, son. You blinded the eye." Noah nodded. He took a step toward the door, then stopped. He looked back at the captain. "Sir?" "Yes, Kettering?" "I'm 15, Noah said. The truth hung in the air. He couldn't hold the lie anymore. Not after this. Higgins looked at him. A small smile, painful through the broken nose, touched his lips. "I don't know what you're talking about, sailor," Higgins said firmly. "According to the ship's manifest, you are 18. And as far as I am concerned, you aged 10 years tonight." Higgins turned back to the window, back to the war. "Carry on, signalman." Noah swallowed hard. He straightened his back, wincing at the pain in his ribs. He brought his hand up, a hand bruised, bloody, and smelling of garbage, and snapped a sharp salute. "Aye, aye, sir." He walked off the bridge. He didn't look like fresh meat anymore. He walked with the limp of a survivor, leaving the boy he used to be behind on the deck plates, dissolved in the blood and the sweat of the night he saved the Holloway. The court-martial of Lieutenant Commander Vance was never made public. He was transferred off the ship in Scapa Flow under a hood, disappeared into the machinery of naval intelligence, and was hanged for treason in a damp courtyard in 1944. The official record stated he died of combat wounds. Noah Kettering stayed on the Holloway. He didn't go back to high school. He fought in the invasion of Normandy. He fought in the Pacific. He grew into his uniform. He never told anyone else about the night on the Fantail. But every year on November 14th, he would light a single candle. Not for the victory. Not for the ship. But for the innocents that died in the dark so that 3,000 men could live to see the dawn. Noah Kettering gave up his childhood and risked a court-martial to save 3,000 men from freezing to death in the Atlantic. The Navy tried to bury this story for 50 years. Don't let them bury it again. It takes you 0.5 seconds to hit like and subscribe to make sure the algorithm pushes this hero story to the world. Don't just watch and scroll away like a ghost ship. Join the Brotherhood, hit that button, and let me know in the comments. If you were 15 and saw a traitor, would you have stayed in the shadows or risked it all?